Hey warriors and history lovers. Tonight we're embarking on an epic exploration of Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire, the breathtaking story of how a kidnapped, distrustful orphan rose to command history's largest contiguous land empire. Before we begin, shout out in the comments where you're joining from and what time it is there. I'm always fascinated by our worldwide community of history enthusiasts. Now, let's set the mood. Lower those lights. Maybe switch on a fan for that perfect background white noise, and prepare to be transported centuries back in time through tonight's immersive journey. Picture this. You're jolted awake somewhere along the frozen banks of the Onad River, cocooned in scratchy wool blankets that reek of damp livestock. The sun hasn't peaked over the horizon yet, and your internal compass is spinning wildly. Your boots are crusted with frost, your nostrils lined with ice crystals, and there's an alarmingly loud snorting sound right beside your head. That's your horse, your four-legged bed warmer, transportation system, mobile heater, and sometimes emergency protein source. Personal boundaries? Non-existent in this nomadic existence. The stubborn creature exhales warm, grassy breath directly into your face while stepping on your coat as you struggle upright. Absolutely no remorse shown. Mongol equines don't do apologies. The entire camp operates with military precision. No unnecessary chatter, just warriors silently mounting up like shadows dispersing at dawn. A scrawny kid who can't be older than 10 gallops past while yawning, his massive bow nearly matching his height, having spent more time in the saddle than you've spent walking properly. You hastily tighten your sash, gather your sparse belongings, and haul your stiff body onto your horse's back. No fanfare, no contemplative moments, no morning meal. You gnaw on leathery dried meat while riding. If your jaw muscles aren't steel cords yet, they will be by tomorrow's sunrise. Assuming you survive that long. The wind doesn't merely blow, it conducts a full-scale assault. This isn't some gentle zephyr, but a skin-flaying force that tests your preparation. You're charging directly into its teeth at full gallop, facial numbness setting in by the third rocky ridge. Nobody inquires about your well-being. You're either keeping formation or becoming permanent landscape decoration. By midday, you've rotated horses twice, not due to your fatigue, but the animals. The expectation is clear: outlast your transportation. If the horse falters, you shoulder more burden. This is Mongol equilibrium. You relieve yourself from horseback. You take meals from horseback. You wage war from horseback. Take a tumble? You'll be pulverized by hooves. Lose momentum? You'll be abandoned without hesitation. Voice complaints? They'll assume the wolves got to you prematurely. You ride because the entire nation rides. No paved roads, no final destinations, just relentless motion and raw survival. In the Mongol Empire, walking signifies captivity. And you're not a captive yet. You've endured the grueling ride. Congratulations. Now you're ravenous. Unfortunate. Breakfast here isn't nutrition, it's a trial by fire. Someone unceremoniously shoves a sloshing leather pouch at you. Fermented mare's milk, chalky white, mouth puckeringly sour, slightly carbonated, with an aroma reminiscent of a month-old battlefield saddle. You choke it down not from desire, but necessity. They call this concoction Eric, technically containing alcohol, but not the enjoyable variety. More like a bacterial science experiment with your name on it. Mongol children consume this daily. Seasoned warriors drink it. Elderly matriarchs swear by it. If it scorches your throat on the way down, that's how you know it's effective. Sustenance. Perhaps some desiccated mutton jerky the color of storm clouds and tough enough to repair footwear. You masticate relentlessly for 20 minutes. The leathery substance doesn't diminish, just becomes marginally more pliable. There's also curd, sun-baked dairy nodules that could serve as primitive artillery ammunition. The flavor resembles sour chalk dust, the texture mimics riverbed gravel, and the experience makes your molars reconsider their life choices. You contemplate weeping, but any tears would freeze mid-cheek. You squat on the frozen ground. No dining furniture, just howling winds, itchy wool garments, and the distinctive aroma of unidentified hooves boiling nearby. No cutlery either, just your grimy hands and the silent disapproval radiating from a grizzled elder who's already finished his meal, repaired his saddle rigging, and is now honing a blade with the devotion of a monk at prayer. You consume what's provided without interrogation. Curiosity is the quickest path to an empty stomach. No dinner conversation either. Mongols conserve words during meals as carefully as during combat. They nourish themselves with the same efficiency as their cavalry maneuvers, rapidly, silently, prepared for immediate movement. Your attempts to match their tempo end in humiliating failure. The stubborn mutton resists digestion. You're not satiated, just slightly less ravenous. In the Mongol Empire, this qualifies as success. By mid-morning, both your body and the horses glisten with sweat, which inevitably raises the question of hygiene, or more accurately, its conspicuous absence. Cleanliness here isn't about pleasant fragrances or pampering, but avoiding lethal infections, and even that's flexible. You exude an aroma combining tanned leather, equine perspiration, charred meat, and whatever questionable substances line your boots. Everyone else shares this distinctive bouquet, no judgment passed. Arrive smelling floral, and you're immediately suspect, either a spy or spiritually contaminated. Water exists for drinking, not washing. Yearn for a refreshing river scrub? That's the community drinking supply. Prefer agonizing intestinal distress with silky skin? Be our guest. Otherwise, wipe your grimy face on your equally filthy sleeve and carry on. Soap hasn't been invented here, just rendered animal fat and wood ash. Desperate for skincare? Vigorously rub dirt into your face and pretend it's an expensive spa treatment. Your hands sport permanent grime, your fingernails could function as weapons, and your hair hasn't encountered water in seasons, though it's neatly bound under your cap because appearances matter, just not sanitation. Grease earns respect in this society. You don't eliminate lice, you christen them and flick them into campfires during evening socializing. When the biting becomes unbearable, you slather yourself in animal fat and challenge them to continue. Clothing? Coarse wool garments, worn continuously for 3 brutal winters, still bearing stains from that violent disagreement with a goat you barely recall. You don't change outfits, you add or subtract layers. Pile on more when the blizzards come, peel off during the brief summer. Undergarments? Probably fictional. So is modesty. Your dental hygiene? Your personal crisis. No toothbrushes exist, no mouthwash. You gnaw on bones, swill arrogant, and hope the acidic brew dissolves whatever's wedged between your molars. Keep a sharp knife accessible, not for enemies, but for that one rebellious tooth threatening mutiny. Now that you've unlearned everything you knew about hygiene, it's time to ride into your first skirmish. You ride all morning and into the afternoon. You are not told where you're going. You are simply going. And then you see them, dark specks moving ominously on the horizon. Riders like you, but not like you, because they're not here to share fermented milk and stories. They're here to die or make you die. The choice is flexible. Nobody panics. That would be embarrassing. Hands simply find bows with the casual efficiency of chefs reaching for knives. Mongol bows are deceptive, compact, curved, and somehow heavier than they appear. Crafted from layers of horn, sinew, and pure lethal intent. They don't forgive mistakes. They rarely miss twice. You knock an arrow while your horse maintains its ground-eating lope. No slowing down. That would be shameful. You twist at the waist like you were born to this. Lean into the screaming wind and release. The arrow flies. So do theirs. Welcome to Mongol warfare. No glorious sword duels. No chivalrous challenges. Just arrows. Relentless, intelligent, brutally efficient arrows fired from impossible distances at full gallop. You blink, and 3 enemies are already down. 2 more are fleeing in random directions, possibly reconsidering their life choices. The secret is perpetual motion, always moving. When enemies charge, you retreat, not in fear, but with purpose. The legendary feigned retreat. Let them think you're running. Let them chase. Then spin and put an arrow through their grinning face. You're part of a deadly ballet, swift, precise, merciless. No battle cries, no dramatic shouts, Just the sharp snap of bowstrings and the wet thud of impact. Someone screams briefly. You don't look. Your arrows aren't just sharp, they're poisoned. Not personal, practical. Wound one enemy and watch his comrades waste energy dragging him away. Wound two and you've crippled their entire flank. Efficiency trumps honor every time. You've lost count of arrows fired. 50? 60? Doesn't matter. Your saddle carries 70 more in a special quiver. You shoot until your fingers blister. Then shoot some more because stopping means losing those fingers entirely. By sunset, it's over. No body counts taken. No trophies collected. Only one metric matters. You're still mounted. No celebrations. You wipe your blade. You eat. You sleep. Tomorrow you ride again. The battle's over. The sun dips below the hills. No victory songs. No parades. Just crackling fires and the wet sounds of butchering nearby. Dinner. You're expected to eat what you kill. Didn't kill anything today? Don't worry. Someone did. You just help prepare it. That means skinning, slicing, roasting, or occasionally stabbing the goat again because it's still twitching somehow. The meat is tough. Naturally, these animals spent their lives climbing mountains in blizzards. You roasted on an ancient iron spit that's been in someone's family longer than most family members. No spices. No salt. No ceremony. If it bleeds less than you, it's done. You sit in a firelit circle, chewing silently. Everyone stares into the flames like they're reading fortunes. A warrior beside you cleans a rib bone with his teeth, licks it thoughtfully, then tosses it over his shoulder like it might grow into another meal. The fat is precious. Greasy, rich, life-sustaining. Mongols worship fat, not for flavor, but survival. It clings to your ribs and keeps your soul from freezing at night. You don't question it. You attack it like it insulted your ancestors. No bread, no vegetables, just meat, dairy, and something in a wooden bowl that might be soup or might be regret. If someone hands you an organ, you take it. You eat it. You don't ask what it was in life. Curiosity is a luxury you can't afford. You're not nobility. You're not a guest. You're a stomach with legs and a knife. After eating, no cleanup. Bones go to dogs. Ashes to the wind. You wipe your hands on your cloak, which also serves as napkin, towel, and winter blanket. Hygiene remains theoretical. Someone belches loudly. This is considered high manners. You follow suit. Congratulations. You're adapting. Later, curled in your felt bedroll beside a snoring horse, you'll dream of meat because that's tomorrow's menu too. And if there isn't meat, you'll ride further until there is. There's no announcement when winter comes. No poetic first snowfall. One night you're sleeping barefoot. The next morning your boots are frozen solid, and so is your will to live. Welcome to winter on the steppe. It doesn't get cold, it becomes cold. A creeping, bone-deep, soul-crushing cold that wraps around your ribs and whispers, you don't belong here. The wind doesn't howl, it bites. With teeth, aimed at your ears. Your breath turns to fog, then ice, then regret. You sleep with your horse now. Not near your horse. With your horse. Back pressed against its smelly warmth like it's a lover made of hay and muscle. You'd call it awkward, but at least it's warm. Clothing becomes a layering game. Wool over leather over fur. You stop feeling fingers by mid-morning. Stop feeling toes the next day. You try not to think about it. If they come back, great. If not, fewer things to stub. No firewood here. Just frozen dung. You burn it without complaint. It smells like betrayal, but it's heat. The smoke curls into your face, making your eyes water. You blink and your eyelashes freeze together. Now you're part ice sculpture. Your water is ice. Your food is ice. Your nose bleeds ice. You ride anyway. Mongols don't stop for weather. If it's not an arrow or plague, it's not worth mentioning. You ride with snow in your boots and wind in your bones. Nobody cares, especially not the horses who seem to enjoy this. The cold changes you, steals your voice, dries your skin, rewrites your personality into something quieter, stiffer, and much less optimistic. You stop complaining, not from stoicism, but because your jaw is frozen shut. And yet you keep moving, because stopping means freezing. And freezing means someone will pile rocks over your corpse and ride on without breaking stride. The Empire doesn't wait for spring. Neither do you. He doesn't look like a legend. Just a man sitting cross-legged on a plain wooden platform, chewing dried meat like a bored butcher. His fur-lined coat is weather-beaten, his beard uneven, his boots stained with blood, whether from battle, livestock, or last week's tax dispute is unclear. This is your Khan, your general, your leader, the man who can erase cities with a raised eyebrow. You don't speak first. You don't stare too long. You definitely don't correct his pronunciation, even if he's been calling you that one with the bad hair for 6 months straight. He speaks softly. Mongol leaders don't shout. If you can't hear him, that's your problem. Listen harder, or read his tone, or follow your suddenly loud heartbeat. Orders are short, precise, absolute. Ride here. Burn this. Accept tribute. Behead the messenger. Don't return until it's done. You nod. Everyone nods. Even the tough guys, warriors who once outran siege fires, nod like nervous schoolboys. One man coughs during briefing. He's gone now. Nobody mentions him again. Your Khan doesn't care about your feelings. He cares about results. Did the city fall? Did you bring tribute? Are the horses fed? If the answer is no, you'd better be holding your severed arm as an excuse. His tent isn't lavish, but it holds maps. So many maps. Hand-drawn, annotated in script so precise it looks like a falcon learned calligraphy. You understand none of it. He understands all of it. Rivers are roads to him. Mountains mild inconveniences. Kingdoms just poorly wrapped gifts. You get your orders. You leave. You don't ask questions. You don't linger. You saddle your horse and ride into the cold again. Because in the Mongol Empire, leadership isn't about charisma. It's about survival. And those who question the Khan rarely get to do it twice. You ride into foreign lands carrying messages, not swords. Today you're not a soldier, you're an ambassador. This doesn't mean you're safe. Your small entourage moves under a flag of truce, radiating the smug confidence of someone who knows thousands of warriors stand ready to burn civilizations if this letter gets rejected. The message itself is brutally simple. A few lines scrawled in Mongolian, Persian, maybe Chinese depending on the unlucky recipient. It reads something like, submit or don't. We're coming either way. Sealed with the Khan's mark, a wax insignia that might as well be soaked in kerosene considering what follows refusal. You enter cities with marble gates, golden domes, silk curtains, and nervous guards. You're fed. You're questioned. You're stared at like a wolf that's somehow been invited to dinner. You remain polite, calm. You patiently explain how submission benefits everyone. Mongol protection brings trade, order, and slightly fewer massacres. Refusal brings fire, arrows, and the systematic removal of anything resembling architecture. Sometimes they say yes. They offer tribute, horses, gold, daughters. You nod, you leave, you report back. That city survives, for now. Sometimes they hesitate. They whisper behind closed doors. They send you back with vague answers and suspiciously generous gifts. You accept them. You smile. You memorize everything. And sometimes they kill the messenger. This never ends well for them. Your death isn't avenged with angry letters. It's avenged with siege engines, horse archers, psychological warfare, and creative displays of severed heads as decorative warnings. Mongol diplomacy operates at terrifying speed. One message, one chance, no follow-up letters, no passive-aggressive negotiations. You deliver the Khan's will. If ignored, his response arrives strapped to 40,000 mounted archers and some very enthusiastic engineers. You don't argue. You don't bargain. You deliver. And if the world listens, it lives. You've ridden into what passes for a Mongol capital expecting walls, maybe a palace with polished floors and fig-bearing attendants. Instead, you find a sea of yurts, hundreds of felt domes stretching across the plains like mushrooms after rain. No stone, no marble, just wool, smoke, and the unmistakable scent of boiling mystery meat. This is Karakorum, beating heart of an empire spanning from Korea to Europe's edge. It looks like a lost sheep convention, but don't be fooled. This mobile city functions flawlessly. Yurts aren't primitive huts, they're portable command centers. Each can be dismantled in an hour and rebuilt by nightfall. You can burn a city. You can't burn what's already packed, and moving by dawn. The Khan's yurt looms larger, its doorway perpetually facing south. You don't enter uninvited. Inside, furs, scrolls, and a throne that looks less like royal furniture and more like a siege-resistant perch. People from empire's corners gather here. Baghdad merchants, Kievan princes, Song dynasty spies, all sitting cross-legged drinking mare's milk while pretending not to notice the woman disassembling a deer with a spoon. There's no European-style bureaucracy here. No towers of scribes. Just a man with a steel-trap memory and assistants writing on bone tablets with expressions of mild terror. Laws are spoken. Decrees sent by a horseback. Paper is precious. Ink expensive. Mistakes fatal. Yet the streets stay clean. Roads remain safe. Trade routes hum like bloodstreams. There's no poverty because there's no room for uselessness. You're either contributing or on a horse somewhere being made useful. This isn't Rome. This isn't Baghdad. This is the Mongol answer to civilization. Mobile, brutal, efficient. No spires. No statues. Just felt, fire, and the knowledge this entire city could vanish by sunrise and reappear 5 valleys away like it never existed. You steal a horse. You're hungry. Cold. It looks unattended. Just a quick ride, you think. Maybe 2 miles. You'll bring it back. Probably. They catch you before the tree line. Now you're kneeling before a man whose mustache could qualify as a weapon. He's not angry. Not shouting. Just pointing between the horse, you, and a conveniently flat rock nearby. Welcome to Mongol justice. No prisons. No appeals. Number 16 step legal process. Just 2 options, repayment or removal. Steal? Repay double if possible. Can't pay? Something gets taken. A finger, hand, occasionally your head, depending on the item's value and the judge's mood. You plead your case briefly. Mongols value brevity. Talk too long, and they assume you're lying. You condense your explanation to 3 words, hoping they count as character references. Elders confer. One spits. Another shrugs. They nod. Verdict: you live. Sentence: you walk. Literally. The horse is gone. You'll follow the caravan on foot until your honor's restored. Maybe a season, maybe years. No timeline given. Mongols aren't sentimental about rehabilitation. You're either punished or not. After that, they expect you to keep up. Murder? Death penalty. Unless it's a justified blood feud. Then you owe the family livestock, labor, or a wife. Preferably all 3. Lie to your commander? Death. Harm a fellow Mongol? Death. Harm a protected foreigner? Double death with extra ceremony. But honesty, courage, generosity, deeply respected. Even if you smell like fermented despair and ride like a sack of potatoes, speak truth and keep your word, and you'll always eat. Mongol law is harsh but fast, predictable, and famously unbribable. You always know where you stand, usually before someone holding a sword. And if your conscience is clean, so are your hands, mostly. The scouts return silently. No speeches, just a nod westward where smoke rises like a promise. A city, walled, fortified, the kind of place that believes gates and guards mean something. How adorable. You ride out at dawn. Behind you, engineers carry carts of gifts, ropes, axes, fire pots, collapsible siege equipment. The Mongol version of party favors. No grand speeches. No blessings. No drum rolls. Just hand signals and the synchronized sound of 5,000 men reaching for bows. First you circle. Always circle. You observe. You note weaknesses, a leaning tower, poorly placed gate, wall section that's seen better centuries. You whisper observations to your captain who grunts and scratches diagrams in dirt with his dagger. Then the noise begins. Screams. Horns. Fire. You don't charge immediately. You wait. Let panic work for you. Let citizens trip over themselves deciding whether to hide gold or bury children. Every second they hesitate, your engineers creep closer with ladders and polite catapults. Walls. No problem. Mongols build siege towers on site using local trees, rocks, even furniture from recently evacuated monasteries. You don't carry equipment, you carry ingenuity. Archers create a weather system of arrows. darkening skies before raining down with soft thuds of progress. Then you strike the gate, not like a hammer, but like wind with teeth. You pour through the breach, blades drawn, horses foaming, eyes narrowed not from rage but calculation. This isn't madness. It's math. Every cleared alley brings you closer to granaries. Every conquered corner is logistics. You don't loot from greed, you loot for supply. When it's over, when towers fall and banners get torn down, you don't celebrate. You inventory. Who surrendered? Who resisted? Who's useful? Who's decorative? The rest disappears swiftly, efficiently. By nightfall, the city is Mongol. And you? Already planning to be elsewhere tomorrow. The banners fly. The bodies don't. The city's quiet now. The kind of quiet that comes when everyone realizes who's in charge. You, the horse-breathing outsider who was elbow-deep in siege engines this morning and is now reviewing tax codes over goat stew. Because conquest isn't the end in the Mongol Empire. It's onboarding. Locals peek from shattered windows expecting years of pillage and resentment. Instead, they get a fur-clad man holding a jobs list. Mongols don't destroy everything, just what resists. The rest gets cataloged. Blacksmith? Stay. Weaver? Stay. Scholar? Congratulations. You now work for a man who's never read a book, but knows exactly how many arrows it takes to erase a library. No complex government structure. Just you, some scribes, and Mongol common sense. You appoint local officials who understand the language and how not to get stabbed during tax collection. Laws stay simple. Obey the Khan. Pay dues. Don't cause trouble. If that sounds vague, don't worry. Enforcement is crystal clear. One warning, then rope. Trade routes reopen by noon. Toll stations operate by evening. Markets sell roasted fish like nothing happened because commerce is the empire's second religion after horses. You don't impose your culture. Don't build statues. Just ensure grain gets counted and caravans leave on time. Mongol rule isn't about identity. It's about efficiency. Keep your temples. Keep your customs. Just don't keep your rebellion. Taxes get levied. Census takers move in. By week's end, yesterday's screaming masses are grateful for safer roads. You conquered them? Yes. But you also improved delivery times. You're riding west now, further than you've ever ventured, past familiar pastures, sacked cities, even yurts bearing familiar insults carved into their frames. This is the frontier, where the empire's edges fray into rumor and thin air. No one gives directions here. Directions are for people with roads. You get gestures instead, a shrug toward mountains, a vague wave past smoking valleys, and the eternal Mongol compass. Follow the bones. Out here, you pass things the empire hasn't decided whether to acknowledge. Strange stone towers. Half-built forts abandoned mid-construction. Trees wrapped in ribbons. Gifts for gods who've clearly stopped answering prayers. You pass a monastery with its doors ripped off. Inside, incense and silence. A monk bows, offers tea, doesn't flinch when you track mud across sacred floors. He's seen your kind before. Knows what happens when someone says no. Then come the whispers about ghost armies, cities vanishing overnight, a mountain pass where a Khan's brother disappeared only to return 2 years later smiling and never blinking again. You dismiss most of it, but slow your pace regardless. At night, you camp in silence. No fires, no laughter, just you, your horse, and wolves debating theology nearby. You pull your cloak tighter and check your blade twice, not for bandits, but stories that start with no one who rode this way. Even your horse seems uneasy, and this is an animal that's eaten human flesh and napped through thunderstorms. The Empire's edge isn't marked by fences. It's marked by atmosphere, a thinning of command, a stretching of logic. Here, the Khan's word arrives late and often whispered. Still, your orders hold. Scout, observe, return. You note every peculiar village, half-finished temple, field where grass grows sideways. When you finally turn back toward civilization, you feel the Empire's weight behind you. Heavy, brutal, real. The edge didn't swallow you this time. You're returning intact, which in Mongol terms is practically sainthood. Your horse is leaner. Your boots bloodstained. Your teeth fewer. But your scroll case bulges with names, maps, tribute lists, sketches of fortresses that looked at you funny. You hand it over. A scribe nods. A commander grunts. The empire continues. And someday, in some distant European library or distracted Chinese court, someone will unroll your scroll, frown at your name they can't pronounce, stare at numbers counted with frozen fingers after 3 sleepless days, and declare, "These must be exaggerated." Because history has this habit, it sands down what makes it nervous. And the Mongol Empire makes historians very nervous indeed. They'll call you barbarians, savages, a horde, as if you were one mindless mass of horses and arrows with no trade routes, no diplomats, no legal system forged in blood and common sense. They'll forget the engineers, the postal system, the religious tolerance. They'll remember the sieges, who wouldn't? But not that you asked cities to surrender before burning them. That you offered peace, order, lower tolls. They'll paint your faces twisted in rage, never showing months spent negotiating water rights with men who bathed once a decade. They'll turn pragmatic governance into chaos, brutal discipline into madness, efficient conquest into mindless destruction. And they'll conveniently ignore how their own kingdoms were crumbling long before you arrived with torches and blueprints. But you don't care, because you weren't building monuments. You were building roads, real ones, making empires answer for their walls, making the world smaller, one hoofbeat at a time. And if history remembers you only as shadows from the east, fine. Charlemagne's exact birthplace remains as mysterious as a monk's tax records. Some say Herstal. Others argue Aachen or Ingelheim. The truth? In the mid-8th century, nobody kept birth certificates, especially not for future emperors. What we know, around 742, a boy was born to Pepin the Short and Bertrada of Leon. And that boy would define medieval Europe. Now, Pepin wasn't your average Frankish noble. He'd recently pulled off one of history's slickest coups, deposed the Merovingian puppet king Childeric III, secured papal blessing to crown himself king of the Franks. Meaning little Charles was born not just into power, but into a dynasty reinventing legitimate rule itself. His childhood wasn't spent chasing frogs in meadows. He was being groomed. For war, for rule, for theology, sometimes all at once. Frankish education wasn't poetry and philosophy. It was swords, prayer, and not getting stabbed by unruly nobles. His tutor, possibly a man named Fulrad, was less bedtime stories, more recite these Latin prayers or feel my wrath. We know little about young Charles's personality. No diaries survive. His biographer Einhard wrote about him like a fanboy documenting a celebrity crush. But one thing's clear, even young, he stood out. Not just because he grew over 6 feet tall when 5 feet was impressive, but because leadership came as naturally as breathing. By 768, when Pepin died, Charles was ready to inherit, well, half of it. In true medieval fashion, the realm was split between him and brother Carloman. Shared power never works well in monarchies or at family dinners. Tensions simmered immediately. But for now, Charles was officially king, young, ambitious, already eyeing a Europe not united since Rome. The crown was on his head, the sword in his hand. And Europe? Europe was about to meet its new architect. Charles's first challenge wasn't foreign invasion or rebellious nobles. It was Carloman, his younger brother, the other crown wearer. Pepin had split the Frankish kingdom between them. Charles got the west, Carloman the east. In theory, peaceful co-rule. In practice, passive-aggressive disaster with swords. The brothers didn't get along. Their territories were technically allied, but courts operated like rival military camps. Carloman was suspicious, prideful, possibly just difficult. Charles was already showing his ruthless strategic mind and wasn't about to let little brother clip his wings. Tensions escalated over petty slights and political maneuvering. One telling moment, when Charles suppressed an Aquitaine rebellion, Carloman refused to send troops, classic little brother move. Let big bro do the fighting, then sulk when he gets credit. Into this mess walked Desiderius, Lombard king in northern Italy, offering a marriage alliance, his daughter for peace. Charles, ever the opportunist, agreed and married her. Carloman saw this as betrayal. Desiderius had supported their father. Now Charles was cozying up to him. Medieval soap opera material. Then, conveniently, Carloman died in 771, barely 3 years into their dual reign. Official cause, natural. Medieval translation, could be pneumonia, could be looking at someone wrong. Charles wasted no time. He absorbed Carloman's territory like he'd planned it for years. Carloman's widow and children fled to, guess who? Desiderius, now furious. So Charles had all Francia under one crown. No more brother, no more co-king. Just one man, one rule, and growing list of enemies. Next on that list, the in-laws. Now that Carloman was gone, Charles had a kingdom to himself and a problem in Italy. Specifically Desiderius, the Lombard king whose daughter Charles had married then quietly divorced once Carloman died. Awkward. Desiderius wasn't pleased. Worse, he'd taken in Carloman's widow and sons and was now openly supporting their claim to Charles's throne. That's not just annoying in medieval politics. That's a declaration of war with a bow on it. Charles didn't hesitate. In 773, he marched his army across the Alps. No summer stroll, but snow, narrow passes, and occasional avalanches. But Charles crossed anyway because mountains, family drama, and bad weather never stopped him from getting what he wanted. In Italy, Charles besieged Pavia, the Lombard capital. Desiderius dug in. Unfortunately for him, Charles had monk-like patience. He surrounded the city and waited. Months passed. Supplies dwindled. Morale plummeted. By 774, Pavia surrendered. And Charles didn't just win. He took the Lombard crown for himself. No puppet ruler. No playing nice with local nobility. He declared himself king of the Lombards, now ruler of both Franks and Lombards. A medieval power move so bold it echoed to Rome. Speaking of Rome, Pope Adrian I had been watching nervously from the Vatican like a bishop holding his breath during a chess match. Desiderius had threatened papal states before, and the Pope hoped Charles would intervene. He did, and got papal blessing plus a church alliance lasting decades in return. The Lombard campaign wasn't just a family feud turned conquest. It was a statement. Charles wasn't playing by old tribal rules anymore. He was building an empire, now with God's representative on earth backing him, making no much harder to say. With Italy controlled and the Pope sending warm regards, Charles turned north toward the Saxons, not courtly nobles sipping wine, but pagan tribes, wild, warlike, deeply allergic to Christianity. They'd been raiding Frankish borders for years. Charles had had enough. Starting in 772, he launched what would become his most infamous campaign, the Saxon Wars. Not one war, but 18 separate campaigns over 30 years because Saxons kept rebelling the moment his back was turned. At first it went smoothly. Charles stormed Saxony, burned their sacred Irminsul, basically their holy tree, and declared, "Time to be Christian." Saxons smiled, said, "Sure," then rebelled immediately when he left. This kept happening. Charles would march in, crush resistance, forcibly baptize terrified locals, leave. Saxons would kill missionaries, return to old gods. Rinse. Repeat. The notorious 782 massacre at Verdun saw Charles execute 4,500 Saxons in one day, brutal even by medieval standards. Message sent. Conversion wasn't optional. Charles genuinely believed it was his Christian duty to save souls, even if saved through fire and steel. Monks followed his armies. Churches rose as fast as fortresses. Any Saxon refusing baptism? Let's just say the baptismal font came with armed guards. But Saxons wouldn't stay conquered. Northern Germany's forests became graveyards for Frankish soldiers and test of Charles's patience. Year after year, revolt after revolt, the war dragged on. Charles wasn't just a sword-swinging conqueror. He had a soft spot for books. Yes, the man who spent decades forcing Saxons into baptism also launched one of Europe's most important educational revivals, the Carolingian Renaissance. Less about oil paintings, more making sure monks could spell. See, Charles had a problem. His empire was growing faster than governance could keep up. Priests, nobles, officials were functionally illiterate. Administration became medieval telephone. Even the Bible got creatively interpreted. So Charles did something radical, declared education mattered. Invited Europe's best scholars to his court, chief among them Alcuin of York, an Anglo-Saxon intellectual who viewed bad Latin like modern editors view Comic Sans. Under Alcuin, Charles founded palace schools, set curricula, insisted monasteries double as classrooms. This wasn't just for nobles. Charles wanted priests, scribes, even peasants to read and write. In Latin, because what's education if you can't read the Vulgate? Ironically, despite pushing education, Charles himself was barely literate. He spoke several languages but struggled with reading/writing. Stories tell of him keeping wax tablets under his pillow to practice at night. Ruling an empire didn't leave much penmanship time. Still, Charles led by example. He valued knowledge, respected scholars, even standardized handwriting, Carolingian minuscule, that clean, readable script modern fonts still mimic. Before that, manuscripts looked like ink-stained seizure victims. Thanks to Charles, thousands of ancient texts were preserved. Monks copied manuscripts like their lives depended on it. Sometimes they did. Literacy improved. The church cohered. Europe took one step from the Dark Ages. It was Christmas Day, 800 AD. The streets of Rome glittered with winter frost, churches packed to their vaulted ceilings, and Charles, now called Charlemagne, Charles the Great, by grateful chroniclers, knelt in prayer at St. Peter's Basilica like a properly devout Christian king. Or so everyone thought until Pope Leo III pulled off history's most theatrical coronation ambush. As Charles prayed, the Pope suddenly placed a golden crown on his head, proclaiming him Emperor of the Romans before the stunned congregation. No warning, no formal ceremony, no polite, "Hey Charles, wanna be emperor?" Just boom, instant imperial dignity. Historians still debate whether Charles knew this was coming. Some claim it was staged. Others insist he was genuinely surprised. Charlemagne himself later remarked he wouldn't have entered the church had he known, the kind of humble brag only emperors can pull off. But the symbolism was earth-shaking. The Western Roman Empire had fallen in 476. Now, over 3 centuries later, the Pope was resurrecting it with a Frankish king as its new head, a Germanic ruler crowned by the Church, governing Lombards, Saxons, and Latin clergy alike. The Holy Roman Empire was born, though that name came later. This moment shifted everything. Charles's authority was no longer just military, it was spiritual, divine. He now stood as successor to the Caesars, with the Pope as both ally and celestial referee. Not everyone cheered. The Byzantines in Constantinople had been calling themselves Roman emperors for centuries and didn't appreciate some Frankish upstarts stealing their title. Diplomatic tensions simmered for decades, with insults about barbarian emperors and treaties signed under duress. But back home, the title stuck. Charlemagne reigned as emperor until his death in 814, the imperial dignity lending weight to everything from lawmaking to church reforms. It was the crown jewel of his rule, not just gold, but legitimacy, mythology, and political theater woven into one. Conquering half of Europe is impressive. Keeping it running without collapsing into civil war? That's the real magic trick. And Charlemagne, surprisingly, managed it not just through blood and iron, but with ink, messengers, monks, and medieval spreadsheets. As emperor, he got serious about governance. He couldn't be everywhere, so he built a system suspiciously like early bureaucracy, just with more Latin and fewer bribes, probably. At the system's heart were the Missi Dominici, the Lord's envoys, trusted officials, always sent in pairs, one noble, one bishop, who traveled the empire delivering royal decrees, inspecting local lords, and ensuring no one built private kingdoms in backwoods manners. Think medieval auditors with swords and divine authority. Local counts and dukes still governed regions, but answered to Charles. Disobey? A Missi Dominici visit could become a career-ending conversation. Charlemagne didn't tolerate disloyalty. He also introduced capitularies, written laws covering everything from monastery management to military drafts to proper banquet bread. Yes, bread regulation, because empires crumble on bad loaves. This wasn't micromanagement for its own sake. Charles believed in Christian order, a stable, well-run empire reflecting divine favor. His laws weren't just legal, they were moral. He wanted society where everyone knew their role, paid taxes to church and crown, and prayed properly, preferably in approved churches. It wasn't perfect. Corruption persisted. Communication moved at horse speed. Local lords sometimes ignored orders when unwatched. But for governing a territory stretching from the Pyrenees to the Elbe River, it worked shockingly well. By the early 800s, Charlemagne's empire was Europe's largest since Rome's fall. France, Germany, northern Italy, and beyond, straddling cultures, languages, and climates that could give bishops frostbite in July. He ruled Catholics, pagans, semi-Christianized tribes, ambitious nobles, and moody bishops, keeping them mostly in line through sheer presence. On the surface, things looked glorious. The Carolingian Renaissance flourished. Monasteries copied texts like caffeinated scribes. Law and order had vague uniformity. Even coins bore Charlemagne's stern profile, because nothing says, "I'm in charge," like stamping your face on every transaction. But cracks were forming. First, succession. Charlemagne had at least 18 children, thanks to multiple wives and concubines, but only a few were politically viable. He initially divided the empire among 3 sons, until 2 died, leaving only Louis the Pious, his youngest and least charismatic. Louis was deeply Christian, quiet, thoughtful, kind. In other words, everything Charlemagne wasn't. When your empire relies on intimidation, handing it to someone who prefers psalms over politics feels risky. Then there was the nobility. Under Charlemagne, they were kept in check by fear and efficiency. But local counts grew bolder. Some enforced laws zealously, others treated them as suggestions. The empire was stable, but essentially a personality cult with few backup systems. At endless wars, constant rebellions, especially from still restless Saxons, and the cost of maintaining armies and pressure mounted. Even the church, while mostly loyal, had its own agenda. Bishops held political power. Abbots controlled vast lands. They blessed Charlemagne's rule with one hand while pushing back with the other when royal demands clashed with canon law. The empire was magnificent, but like all things built rapidly, it depended entirely on one extraordinary man. And that man was aging. Winter, 814. Charlemagne fell ill at Aachen, his favorite palace city, surrounded by scholars, advisors, and the mingled scents of burnt firewood and ink-stained parchment. At 72, ancient for a man who'd spent decades warring, crossing mountains, and keeping nobles in line, his decline was slow, almost quiet. He fasted, prayed, and, as biographer Ihard put it, accepted death with calm dignity befitting a Christian emperor. On January 28, 814, Charlemagne died. Bells tolled. The empire held its breath. They buried him at Aachen Cathedral beneath a marble throne, wrapped in imperial robes, sword at his side, gospels in his lap. Not a bad send-off for a man crowned emperor via surprise ceremony. Legends later claimed he sat upright in his tomb like a sleeping king ready to rise if needed. Poetic nonsense, of course. His sole surviving son, Louis the Pious, inherited everything: unwieldy borders, rebellious nobles, growing unrest. Louis tried. He really did. But he wasn't his father. The iron grip loosened. Power fragmented. Civil wars erupted. Within decades, Charlemagne's grand empire split into pieces that would become France and Germany. Yet Charlemagne's legacy didn't dissolve. It grew. He became Carolus Magnus, the ideal Christian king. Popes invoked him. Emperors mimicked him. The later Holy Roman Empire claimed him as spiritual founder. Even Napoleon, centuries later, modeled his coronation after Charlemagne's, desperate to borrow that old divine glow. Charlemagne didn't just unite Europe. He gave it a blueprint: Roman law, Germanic kingship, and Christian faith fused together. He helped drag a continent from the Dark Ages ruins, planting seeds for nations that would define it. When he died, the world lost a man but gained a legend. And legends, as Europe would prove again and again, are much harder to bury. A medieval feast wasn't just about eating. It was theater: long wooden tables draped in cloth, torchlight flickering on stone walls, the mingled scents of roasted boar, wine, sweat, and ambition. This wasn't dinner. This was power display. Every dish, seat, spoonful was choreographed social ritual where seating arrangements were political chess. Lords and ladies sat elevated at the high table. Proximity to them signaled importance. Find yourself by a drafty wall near musicians? You're expendable. Food arrived in waves called removes acts in a culinary play. First course: peacocks reassembled with feathers for drama. Then venison, swans, pigeon pies, boar heads with apples in their jaws. Nothing subtle. If it had a face, it stared back at you glazed in wine sauce. Then came subtleties: edible sculptures of sugar, marzipan, or pastry shaped into castles, saints, mythical beasts. Not for eating, for awe. But this wasn't just wealth flexing. Feasts were political tools. Treaties were negotiated between pheasant bites. Alliances sealed over goblets of spiced wine. Marriages arranged between courses. Host badly, and reputations crumbled. Host well, and loyalty could last years. Even silence held meaning. Guests didn't chatter freely. Toasts were timed. Music cued conversations. Jugglers distracted from awkward pauses. Poets recited flattery so thick it made the boars seem bland. Behind every grand feast was pure chaos, the castle kitchen. Not some cozy modern space, but a smoky, shouting, wood-fired war zone run by a hierarchy that would intimidate small armies. At the top, the master cook, medieval Gordon Ramsay, possibly with more swearing in Latin. He oversaw dozens, spit-turners, potboys, pastry makers, fish cleaners, sauciers, and one poor soul whose entire job was plucking poultry. They weren't making 3 dishes but hundreds, often without written recipes because cookbooks were rare, handwritten, and locked tighter than treasure chests. The kitchen fire roared constantly. No thermostats, just blistered hands and guesswork. Meat roasted on massive spits turned by boys whose arms never stopped moving. The meat sizes? Imagine a cow appearing piecemeal over 3 feast days. Sauces were vital, everything drenched in vinegar, wine, and exotic spices. Not to masquerade, that would insult guests, but because spices were wealth displays. Saffron, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, imported luxuries. Serving them wasn't just flavor, it was flexing trade connections. This chicken tastes like cinnamon was medieval for, I'm loaded. Bread was staple but class divided. Nobles got fine white manchet bread. Servants ate coarse brown loaves. Under each dish, a trencher's stale bread acting as a plate that soaked up juices, then got eaten by lower classes or thrown to dogs, depending on the dog's social standing. The smells? Herbs, meat, yeast, sweat, fire. The noise? Constant clanging, shouting, and the occasional doomed goose's protest. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Without this chaos, the noble illusion upstairs collapsed like a bad pie crust. If invited to a medieval feast, congratulations, you're important, rich, or someone's political pawn. But what actually landed on your plate? If you're squeamish, look away. Meat ruled. Deer, boar, rabbit, pheasant, swan, even porpoise if dining by eccentric coastlines. Anything that walked, flew, swam, or resembled meat was fair game. Hunting was both sport and supply chain. Nobles killed what they'd later eat while boasting about it. Whole roasted animals were stars. Entire pigs with polished snouts, apples and mouths. Swans with feathers reattached post-cooking for drama. If it looked dangerous alive, it should look majestic dead. But it wasn't just quantity. Menus were strategic, served in removes. First course, light, soups, small pies, fish, if it was Friday, and the church watched. Later came heavy hitters, roasts, game, meat-stuffed pies. Fish had its day during fasting seasons, eels, pike, herring sometimes molded into non-fish shapes because why serve boring fish when you can serve fish shaped like a hedgehog? Spices? Oh, the spices. Medieval folks didn't do bland. Cinnamon on chicken? Yes. Ginger and gravy? Obviously. Sugar on meat? Why not? Sweet and savory coexisted happily on the same plate, sometimes in the same bite. Vegetables? Suspiciously absent from noble plates. Roots and greens were peasant food, too humble, too earthy. Lords avoided turnips unless stuffed into unicorn-shaped pastries. By feast's end, menus had gone from tame to theatrical. The goal wasn't satisfying hunger, but overwhelming senses, leaving guests stuffed, stunned, and slightly afraid of the next remove. Because dessert might breathe fire. While food clogged arteries and signaled wealth, medieval feasts weren't complete without entertainment, lots of it. You didn't just eat. You laughed, gawked, occasionally winced at what unfolded between courses. Enter the fool, the court jester clad in bells and mismatched colors, with enough audacity to insult the host without getting beheaded. Typically, fools juggled, mocked the powerful, and provided controlled chaos. One bad joke could mean unemployment or execution. Then came minstrels, lutes, harps, voices trained in ballads of love, war, and occasional dragons. Music wasn't background noise, but integral, political commentary, historical records, flattery disguised as melody. If the Lord featured heroically in verse 3, the minstrel ate well tonight. For flashier acts, acrobats, fire breathers, yes, Real fire indoors surrounded by tapestries, safety codes be damned, sword swallowers, animal tamers, even dancing bears who weren't always enthusiastic participants. Then there were subtleties, edible performances, sugar sculptures doubling as political satire, giant pies releasing live birds mid-course for drama. Nothing said, were rich, like doves exploding from pastry while guests dodged droppings. Some feasts included morality plays, theatrical skits about virtue, sin, or not respecting the church, performed by traveling troops or monks way too eager to play the devil. Everything was calculated. Entertainment kept moods light, distracted from political tensions, ensured no guest had time to plot rebellion between wine sips. A good entertainer could prevent duels. A bad one might start them. At medieval feasts, you weren't just watching a show, you were the show. And the laughter? Just another way to keep daggers sheathed. In medieval halls, what you ate mattered less than who you ate it with. Feasts were press conferences, marriage negotiations, corporate takeovers rolled into one greasy spectacle. Hosting wasn't hospitality, it was strategy, signaling wealth, power, generosity, control. Every element. Seating to sauce choice, communicated status. Take seating. The high table wasn't just physically elevated, it radiated social gravity. Lords and ladies sat center flanked by honored guests, bishops, ambassadors, important nobles. Near the salt cellar? You're somebody. Everyone else? Just happy to breathe the same roast-scented air. Hence, above the salt, either near the host and important or seated low with minstrels and empty wine jugs. Invitations weren't casual. Being summoned meant you mattered. Refusing was a statement that might earn armed visitors asking why your chair was empty. Conversely, attending a rival's feast signaled allegiance shifts. Every guest list was a political minefield. The food itself carried messages. Regional delicacies flattered visiting dukes. Abundant game shouted, "My lands are vast." Foreign spices boasted trade connections. Even wine choices spoke volumes. Local, imported, bishop-blessed. Then there were gifts. Guests often brought offerings, jewels, relics, horses, expecting praise in return. Toasts blended flattery, performance, and sometimes warnings. Feasts also sealed alliances, marriage pacts over honeyed quail, land disputes resolved by the third course. If all else failed, rivals could be made drunk enough to sign unfavorable terms or too poisoned to wake up. For all its gluttony, medieval feasting was heavily shaped by the church, the one authority even kings feared. And the church had strong opinions on what, when, and how you ate, with accompanying guilt. The medieval calendar had more fasting than feast days. Nearly half the year demanded dietary restrictions: Wednesdays, Fridays, Lent, Advent, various vigils. On these days, land animal meat was forbidden. So how did nobles feast during fasts? With creativity. They swapped ingredients, out went beef and pork, and came fish, eggs, almonds, and anything that could pretend not to be meat. Beaver tails? Considered fish because scaly and aquatic. Problem solved. God apparently appreciated loopholes. Dishes became culinary acrobatics. Almond milk imitated cheese. Fish was molded into fake roasts. Some meals looked sinful but technically followed rules. Wine? Never counted as food. It just didn't. But on feast days celebrating saints or holy events, all bets were off. The church itself threw festivals, Easter, Christmas, Epiphany, that weren't just sacred but licensed gluttony. A Christmas feast could last 12 days, each course more outrageous than the last. Nothing said Christ is born, like a pie containing 4 bird species. Monasteries weren't exempt. Though monks were supposed to live humbly, some abbeys became legendary for their kitchens. Wealthy monasteries fasted on oysters and spice steel. Monks developed elaborate food schedules with seasonal menus and creative loopholes that kept bellies full while technically sin-free. Ultimately, food was spiritual business. Feasting wasn't just indulgence, but divine performance. Giving thanks before eating, making offerings after. Praying cooks didn't serve meat on forbidden days. In medieval minds, gluttony was sin, but feasting with holiness? That was practically a sacrament. For all the roasted boars and juggling fools, medieval feasts had rules, many rules. If you wanted to keep your status and head, you needed proper greasy-fingered etiquette. First rule, don't touch food like a peasant. Forks weren't common yet, so people ate with fingers, but properly. Use the first three fingers of your right hand, never the left, unless you wanted rumors of witchcraft or poor hygiene. Second, no licking fingers until meals end. It was acceptable to rinse hands in shared basins between courses, but licking during dinner? Low class, like arriving shoeless or being French in an English castle. Every guest brought their own knife, the medieval equivalent of smartphones. Flashy handle? You're important. Rusty blade? Enjoy the worst seat. Knives weren't just for cutting, but personal statements. Drinking etiquette was its own battlefield. No guzzling. You toasted, sipped, offered cups to neighbors, especially if angling for favors or subtly challenging them. And yes, goblets were shared. Germ theory didn't exist yet, and everyone was too busy dying from plague to worry about backwash. Conversation had rules. Talk but not too much. Laugh but not loudly. Praise food but not more than the host. No talking with your mouth full unless insulting rivals. No burping unless Mongolian, or drunk, or both. At fancier feasts, hand-washing was ceremonial. Servants poured scented water over guests' hands before first courses and desserts, not for cleanliness, but to display refinement. Etiquette wasn't about politeness, but proving you belonged. One slip, spilled wine, dirty sleeve, reaching too far, and you weren't feasting with lords anymore. You were with the dogs, and they didn't share wine. After the last swan was carved, final toasts made, and the fool escorted out for juggling rolls into a bishop's goblet, one question remained. What happened to all that food? Medieval feasts produced obscene amounts: boars, pies, jellied fish, sugar castles, bread trenchers soaked in meat juices. More than even the hungriest nobles could consume. But waste was its own message. What you didn't eat spoke as loudly as what you served. If lucky, leftovers went as servants, eating in shifts after nobles finished, picking over lower tables' remains. Sometimes they got choice cuts if guests passed along untouched roasts or declined stuffed hedgehog pastries. Not glamorous, but better than porridge. The trencher bread, those thick slices acting as plates, was special. Saturated with juices and grease, nobles rarely ate it unless very drunk. These soggy slabs were typically collected for the poor, not from charity, but as nobles saying here, have our leftovers. For peasants, bread soaked in bore fat beat sermons on humility. Monasteries and churches turned leftovers into alms. Feeding the poor wasn't just encouraged, but expected. Baskets of scraps were blessed, after removing fingers, and distributed as moral duty. Sometimes the poor were invited to dine post-feast, though seated far differently and without the juggling bear. Not everything was repurposed. Some was discarded, fed to pigs, composted in castle middens. Why? Because in high society, restraint was overrated. A surplus showed wealth. Letting food spoil quietly was part of the show. So while nobles nursed hangovers, life continued. Servants gnawing bones, peasants lining up for trenchers, dogs wrestling over fish heads. Even leftovers had hierarchies. The candles burned low. Minstrels snored under benches. Half the guests were face down in pie crusts. The other half staggered through corridors seeking lost shoes or dignity. The feast was over. But the morning after? That was its own ritual. Cleanup began before guests left. Servants moved like ghosts, clearing bones, scraping trenchers, sweeping rushes off floors, those sweet-smelling herbs masking sweat, wine, and noble flatulence. Rushes were replaced regularly, especially after feasts where floors absorbed more than crumbs. Then came the reckoning. The steward, medieval party planner, assessed damage, broken goblets, missing silver, suspicious gravy puddles near the bishop's seat. Everything was logged. Sometimes guests stole cutlery as weird status symbols. Leaving with a spoon meant you were important enough to dare. The kitchen was a battlefield. Burned pots, cracked platters, enough grease to oil drawbridges. Cooks stumbled out like survivors, some missing eyebrows from oven fires, others muttering about next time just serving porridge. For hosts, real work began post-feast, the politics of gratitude. Letters were written, gifts sent, compliments paid. Offend a powerful guest by seating them too far from the roast swan, and grudges formed. Medieval grudges often became feuds, or wars. Sometimes feasts backfired. Guests insulted, alliances offended, drunken nobles confessing treason over spiced wine. One ill-timed toast could undo months of diplomacy. Feasts were theater, but bad reviews could be deadly. For lower classes, the morning after meant business as usual, washing dishes, shoveling refuse, maybe finding forgotten almond cake crust behind the dais. That was breakfast. Quietly, the castle returned to routine. Banners furled, dogs fed, torches extinguished until the next coronation, wedding, or excuse to impress neighbors. Feasting season ended, but its echoes lingered, in smoke-stained rafters, wine-splashed stones, and memories no one forgot, whether the feast was good or catastrophically bad. The Mongol conquests reshaped Eurasia like a blacksmith's hammer reshaping hot iron, violently, irrevocably, leaving patterns still visible centuries later. But every empire reaches its limits, and the Mongols were no exception. By the late 13th century, their vast domains were fracturing into rival khanates, each adapting local customs while clinging to Mongol identity. This was no collapse, just evolution. And from this evolution emerged Timur, known to history as Tamerlane, a man who would make Genghis Khan look like a hesitant administrator. Timur wasn't born Mongol. He was a Turkic noble from Transoxiana, modern Uzbekistan, but he modeled himself after Genghis with terrifying precision. His early life reads like a warlord's instruction manual. Minor noble background, military talent spotted young, early career spent balancing between Mongol warlords like a knife juggler working with live blades. By his 30s, he'd unified the region not through diplomacy, but by systematically eliminating rivals, a strategy that would define his reign. His capital at Samarkand became the stage for imperial theater, where Mongol rulers favored mobile camps. Timur built monumental architecture designed to awe, mosques with portals tall enough to ride elephants through, courtyards paved with captured marble, even an entire street of craftsmen forcibly relocated from conquered cities. Every brick whispered power. Visitors described a city where the air smelled of spiced meat and wet paint, where construction never ceased, and where the slightest hesitation could land you in a mosaic, literally. Timur liked his art visceral. The military machine he built operated with chilling efficiency. His armies combined Mongol cavalry tactics with Persian siege engineering and something distinctly Timurid, psychological warfare on industrial scale. When he took Baghdad in 1401, he didn't just sack it. He built pyramids of skulls so high they cast shadows at noon. Delhi fell in 1398 to similar treatment. The streets reportedly ran red for days. This wasn't mere brutality, it was messaging. Submit instantly or become an object lesson. Yet Timur was no mindless destroyer. His court attracted scholars, poets, astronomers. Not out of genuine interest, he was functionally illiterate, but because cultural prestige mattered. He'd listen to philosophical debates while having dissidents crushed under construction stones, the original multitasker. His patronage produced exquisite Persian miniatures and architectural wonders, all funded by looted gold. The contradiction defined him, part scholar's benefactor, part human landslide. His final campaign targeted Ming China, a plot twist even historians find audacious. In 1405, aged 68 and half crippled from old wounds, he assembled an army rumored to number nearly 1 million. Then, at the march's outset, he died, possibly from pneumonia, possibly from karma finally collecting payment. His empire fragmented within years, but his legacy endured in blood and brick. The mosques still standing, the skull piles long grassed over, the stories growing taller with each telling. While Timur's empire rose and fell in Central Asia, Europe was busy reinventing itself through two parallel revolutions, one intellectual, one microbial. The first centered on Italy, where scholars were rediscovering classical texts preserved by Arab and Byzantine scholars. This Renaissance, rebirth, wasn't just about art. It was a fundamental shift in how Europeans saw themselves and their place in the world. At its heart was humanism, the radical idea that human beings mattered as individuals, that earthly life had value beyond preparing for the afterlife. This wasn't atheism. Most humanists were devout Christians, but a rebalancing of priorities. Scholars like Petrarch scoured monastery libraries for forgotten Roman manuscripts, while others mastered Greek to read Plato and Aristotle in the original. The printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440, turned this trickle of knowledge into a flood. Suddenly ideas could spread faster than plague, which, coincidentally, was still spreading. Because while intellectuals debated Cicero's prose style, most Europeans were still dying in droves from the Black Death's aftershocks. The plague never truly left after its 14th century debut. It just became a recurring nightmare, flaring up every generation to cull the population. Cities stank of death and incense, the preferred masking agent. Graveyards overflowed, and the constant presence of mortality colored everything from art to investment strategies. Why build long-term when you might be dead by Tuesday? The church's authority was cracking under these pressures. When prayers failed to stop plague and priests died like everyone else, people started asking uncomfortable questions. Reformers like John Wycliffe and Jan Hus challenged papal authority, translating the Bible into vernacular languages so commoners could read it themselves. This was heresy, but the kind that stuck, foreshadowing the Protestant Reformation brewing on history's horizon. Meanwhile, kingdoms were consolidating. England and France exhausted themselves in the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, a conflict that saw knights in shining armor get humiliated by peasant longbowmen at battles like Agincourt. By war's end, both nations had stronger centralized governments and a lasting mutual dislike. Spain unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, who promptly funded some Italian navigator named Columbus in 1492. And in the east, the Ottomans took Constantinople in 1453, ending the Byzantine Empire and making Mehmed II very pleased with himself. Technology was changing warfare. Gunpowder, known in Europe since the 1300s, was making castles obsolete just as nobles finished building really big ones. The 1415 Battle of Agincourt proved massed longbows could slaughter armored knights, while the 1453 siege of Constantinople showed cannons could smash walls that had stood for centuries. War was becoming less about individual bravery and more about logistics, finance, and who had the better metallurgists. Through all this chaos, ordinary people were just trying to survive. Peasants still farmed the same fields their ancestors had, though now some were getting paid wages after the plague created labor shortages. Towns grew into cities, guilds controlled trade secrets, and the first banks appeared in Italy, along with double-entry bookkeeping, the real unsung hero of capitalism. Life was hard, unpredictable, and frequently short, but the seeds of modernity were sprouting in unlikely places. The Renaissance wasn't confined to Italy. By the 15th century, its ideas were spreading north, blending with local traditions to create distinct flavors of cultural rebirth. In Flanders, artists like Jan van Eyck perfected oil painting techniques, capturing reality with startling precision, the birth of portrait culture. German printers churned out not just classical texts, but vernacular literature and, increasingly, Protestant pamphlets. Even in England, far from the Mediterranean's classical roots, scholars were reimagining education and governance. This Northern Renaissance had a more religious, introspective quality than its Italian counterpart. While Italian humanists reveled in pagan antiquity, Northern thinkers like Erasmus focused on reforming Christianity from within. His praise of folly satirized church corruption while advocating a return to early Christian simplicity, dangerous ideas that would soon explode across Europe. Art reflected these values. Where Italian Renaissance art glorified the human form and classical ideals, Northern works overflowed with symbolic detail, every flower, candle, and household object carrying hidden meaning. Hans Holbein's portraits captured not just faces but psychological depth, while Albrecht Dürer's engravings blended mathematical precision with Gothic imagination. This was art as moral instruction, beautiful but purposeful. The commercial revolution accompanied this intellectual ferment. Bruges, Antwerp, and other northern cities became hubs of international trade, where Italian banking met Flemish wool and German metalwork. Merchants grew wealthy enough to commission art, creating a new bourgeois culture independent of nobility or clergy. The first stock exchanges emerged in Antwerp and Lyon, while complex credit networks spanned continents. Early globalization fueled by wool, wine, and human greed. Printing presses multiplied across Europe, churning out Bibles, classical texts, and increasingly, controversial pamphlets. Literacy rates inched upward, though most people still experienced texts read aloud in taverns or town squares. The written word was becoming democratized, a trend that terrified authorities accustomed to controlling information. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517, printers made sure all Europe knew within months. Science was stirring too. Though still entwined with magic and theology, early modern thinkers were questioning ancient authorities. Astronomers like Nicholas Copernicus were daring to suggest the Earth might not be the universe's center, heresy wrapped in mathematics. Medicine remained largely theoretical, but autopsies were advancing anatomy knowledge, despite the church's discomfort with corpse cutting. Even technology progressed, with mechanical clocks and improved navigation tools enabling Europe's outward expansion. This northern flowering wasn't without darkness. The same period saw witch hysteria intensify, particularly in German lands. Jewish communities faced periodic expulsions and violence, and the Protestant Reformation, when it came, would drown Europe in decades of warfare. But for a few decades around 1500, Northern Europe buzzed with creative energy, the last brilliant flare of medieval civilization before modernity proper began. All these currents, intellectual, religious, economic, converged in the person of Charles V, who by sheer dynastic luck inherited Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, the Netherlands, and chunks of Italy and the Americas by 1519. His reign, 1519 to 1556, became a desperate juggling act, trying to manage Luther's heresy, Ottoman advances, colonial administration, and perpetual bankruptcy from fighting too many wars. He eventually abdicated to live in a monastery, exhausted by the impossibility of governing a world changing too fast for any one man to control. Because that was the Renaissance's true legacy, not just pretty paintings, but the unsettling realization that the world was far bigger, far more complex, and far less stable than medieval people had assumed. The old certainties were crumbling. New ideas spread uncontrollably. Global connections were forming, and in this maelstrom of change, Europe was stumbling toward modernity, sometimes enlightened, often bloody, always fascinating. The Protestant Reformation didn't begin with a bang, but with the dry hammer strike of a nail on a church door in Wittenberg. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther, an intense German monk with a theologian's mind and a revolutionary's temper, posted his 95 Theses criticizing church corruption. He intended academic debate. What he got was history's first viral media storm, courtesy of Gutenberg's printing press. Within months, copies spread across Europe like wildfire in a drought. Proof that when technology meets discontent, revolutions happen. Luther's complaints weren't new. Selling indulgences, basically sin forgiveness coupons, to fund St. Peter's Basilica's construction was just the latest in centuries of church abuses. But timing is everything. The Renaissance had already primed people to question authority. Nationalism made Germans resent Italian popes, and the printing press meant ideas could outrun censors. Soon, Luther was defending himself before the Holy Roman Emperor at the Diet of Worms, 1521, refusing to recant with legendary words, "Here I stand. I can do no other." The church excommunicated him. German princes protected him. And just like that, Western Christianity split like a poorly cut log. Luther's theology, salvation by faith alone, Bible as sole authority, priesthood of all believers, became Protestantism's foundation. But revolutions rarely stay controlled. Soon more radical reformers emerged, like Swiss Ulrich Zwingli, who stripped churches bare of art, or John Calvin, whose Geneva became a theocratic police state where dancing could get you fined. England's Reformation took a different path, less theology, more soap opera. When Pope Clement VII refused to annul Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, she hadn't produced a male heir. The king declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, 1534. Monasteries were dissolved, their lands seized, and England lurched between Protestantism and Catholicism for decades under Henry's children. Edward VI radical reforms. Mary I bloody Catholic restoration, Bloody Mary. Then Elizabeth I pragmatic compromise. The Catholic Church didn't take this lying down. The Counter-Reformation, 1545 to 1648, saw internal reforms, Council of Trent, and external pushes, Jesuit missionaries, inquisitions. Art became propaganda. Baroque's emotional intensity aimed to reconvert hearts through beauty. For every Protestant simplifying worship, Catholics doubled down on sensory splendor, incense, frescoes, Palestrina's polyphony. It was culture war with eternal souls at stake. Meanwhile, ordinary believers faced impossible choices. Changing rulers often meant changing religions overnight. Some conformed. Others became crypto-Protestants or secret Catholics. Many just wanted to tend their farms without being burned alive for incorrect bread rituals. The Reformation's great irony? It championed individual conscience while creating societies just as intolerant as before, just with different theology. Religious wars followed inevitably. Germany's 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, became Europe's most destructive conflict before the World Wars. Villages vanished. Cannibalism occurred during sieges. Mercenaries roamed like locusts. The 1648 Peace of Westphalia finally established that rulers could choose their territory's religion, cuius regio, ius religio. A shaky compromise that at least stopped the wholesale slaughter. While Europe tore itself apart over communion bread, other civilizations were reaching new heights. The Islamic world under the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mongol empires entered what some call the Gunpowder Empire's era, vast, wealthy, and militarily formidable. The Ottomans, after taking Constantinople, 1453, became Europe's perennial nightmare. Suleiman the Magnificent, r. 1520 to 1566, expanded the empire to its zenith, besieging Vienna, dominating the Mediterranean, and governing through a sophisticated system balancing sultanic power, Islamic law, and local autonomy. The Devshirme system took Christian boys as tribute, converting and training them as elite Janissary troops or administrators, social engineering on an imperial scale. Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, became a metropolis where mosques dwarfed churches and the grand bazaar's labyrinthine alleys teemed with goods from 3 continents. Coffee houses buzzed with political gossip and poetic recitals. Unlike Europe's growing religious intolerance, the Ottomans generally tolerated religious minorities as taxpayers, if not equals. Their military relied on gunpowder and discipline, making them the preeminent power until the late 1600s. Further east, Persia's Safavid Empire, 1501 to 1736, gave the world Shah Abbasi, r. 1588 to 1629, who rebuilt Isfahan into a city of turquoise-domed mosques and elegant bridges. The Safavids made Sharia Islam Persia's state religion, creating a distinct identity against Sunni Ottomans and Mongols. Their artistic legacy, intricate tile work, miniature paintings, and poetic traditions, remains Iran's cultural bedrock. India's Mongol Empire, 1526 to 1857, peaked under Akbar, r. 1556 to 1605, possibly history's most interesting ruler. Illiterate but brilliant, he abolished the jizya, tax on non-Muslims, married Hindu princesses, and hosted interfaith debates while expanding his empire through military genius. His grandson Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal, 1632 to 53, a tomb so beautiful it makes grief seem glamorous. Mughal India became the world's economic powerhouse, producing 25% of global GDP by 1700 through textile exports and agricultural efficiency. China's Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644, presents a study in contrasts. Early Ming emperors launched epic voyages. Admiral Zheng, his treasure fleets, 1405 to 1433, reached Africa with ships dwarfing Columbus's. But later rulers turned inward, building the Great Wall as we know it and isolating China just as Europe began global expansion. When Portuguese traders reached China, 1513, they found an advanced civilization utterly convinced of its superiority, a mindset that would cost China dearly in centuries ahead. Japan's Edo period, 1603 to 1868, began when Tokugawa Ieyasu unified Japan after centuries of civil war. His successors enforced Sakoku, closed country, policies, banning Christianity and limiting foreign contact to a tiny Dutch trading post at Nagasaki. This isolation bred internal stability and cultural flowering, kabuki theater, haiku poetry, ukiyo-e prints, but also technological stagnation that would prove disastrous when American gunships arrived in 1853. Meanwhile, in Africa, powerful states like Songhai, controlling Timbuktu's scholarly riches, Benin, famed for bronze artistry, and Great Zimbabwe, its stone ruins still puzzling archaeologists, thrived until European interference escalated from trade to slavery to colonization. The transatlantic slave trade, begun by Portuguese in the 1400s, would by the 1700s become history's largest forced migration, with consequences still reverberating today. The Americas before Columbus held civilizations both sophisticated and brutal. The Aztec Empire, 1428 to 1521, built Tenochtitlan, a Venice-like city on a lake, with floating gardens and temples drenched in sacrificial blood. Their cosmology demanded constant warfare to capture victims for sacrifice, creating a brittle empire hated by subject peoples, a fact Hernán Cortés would exploit. Further south, the Inca Empire, 1438 to 1533, ran history's most efficient bureaucracy without writing, using knotted quipu cords for accounting and runners, chasquis, to relay messages along 25,000 miles of roads. Their terraced agriculture fed millions in the Andes. But civil war and smallpox left them vulnerable to Francisco Pizarro's 168 conquistadors in 1532. North America's Mississippian cultures built Cahokia's massive mounds near modern St. Louis, while Pacific Northwest tribes erected totem poles and hosted potlatches, gift-giving feasts that redistributed wealth. These societies would collapse under European diseases and displacement, their story surviving mainly through archaeology and oral traditions. Europe's overseas expansion began haltingly. Portuguese navigators like Vasco da Gama, who reached India in 1498, sought spices, not conquests, at first. But Columbus's accidental 1492 voyage, he died insisting he'd reached Asia, opened the Americas to exploitation. The 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas divided the globe between Spain and Portugal like children splitting a cookie, arrogance that amuses historians today. Conquistadors were equal parts brave and monstrous. Cortés toppled the Aztecs with a few hundred men, steel weapons, and smallpox. Pizarro captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa after slaughtering thousands unarmed in Cajamarca Square. Their successes relied on local allies, disease, and sheer audacity, but also on the conquistadors' willingness to commit atrocities that horrified even some contemporaries. Colonization's first phase was extractive: gold, silver, sugar, souls. The Spanish encomienda system enslaved indigenous peoples under guise of Christianization, while Portuguese Brazil's plantations birthed the transatlantic slave trade. Bartolomé de las Casas's 1552 account of these horrors sparked the first human rights debates in Europe, though little changed for victims. By the 1600s, Northern European powers joined the colonial scramble. The Dutch East India Company, founded 1602, became history's first multinational corporation, controlling spice trade through ruthless efficiency. English and French settlements in North America began modestly. Jamestown, 1607, nearly starved before tobacco made it profitable, but carried seeds of future world dominance. This global interconnection, the Columbian Exchange, reshaped ecosystems and diets worldwide. Potatoes from the Andes fed Europe's poor, enabling population booms. American corn, tomatoes, and chocolate revolutionized Old World cuisines. In return, Europeans brought wheat, horses, and diseases that killed perhaps 90% of indigenous Americans. History's worst demographic catastrophe. Science advanced despite, or because of, all this chaos. Nicholas Copernicus's 1543 heliocentric model began displacing Earth from the universe's center, a conceptual revolution making Luther's seem small. Galileo's telescope revealed Jupiter's moons, 1610, proving not everything orbited Earth. His 1633 Inquisition trial for heresy showed science's growing tension with religion, a rift widening ever since. Medicine remained medieval in places. London's 1665 Great Plague saw doctors in beaked masks stuffing herbs in their noses against miasma. But William Harvey correctly described blood circulation, 1628, and microscopes revealed microorganisms, though their disease links weren't yet understood. The scientific revolution's key was methodology. Francis Bacon's empiricism, 1620, René Descartes' rationalism, 1637, and later Isaac Newton's synthesis in 1687's Principia, which explained celestial and terrestrial motion through universal gravitation. Suddenly, the universe seemed governed by knowable laws, a radical departure from capricious medieval cosmos. All these currents, religious upheaval, global encounters, scientific awakening, created what we now call early modernity. The medieval worldview, with its unified Christendom and Earth-centered universe, was shattered beyond repair. What would emerge from the fragments was still unclear, but the pieces were falling into place for the Enlightenment, industrialization, and our modern world. The 18th century dawned with Europe balanced on a knife's edge, exhausted from religious wars, yet brimming with restless energy. What emerged was the Enlightenment, less a single movement than a seismic shift in how people viewed reason, authority, and human potential. Parisian salons buzzed with philosophers debating over coffee, a newly fashionable drug, while printers risked censorship to spread radical ideas. Voltaire quipped, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities," a direct challenge to centuries of dogma. At its core, the Enlightenment asked, why should tradition dictate truth? Thinkers like John Locke argued knowledge comes from experience, not divine revelation. Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, 1751 to 1772, attempted to catalog all human knowledge while subtly undermining church authority. Even monarchs caught the spirit. Enlightened despots, like Prussia's Frederick the Great and Russia's Catherine II, modernized laws while keeping absolute power. The contradictions were many, but the momentum unstoppable. Science accelerated this transformation. Isaac Newton's laws now governed everything from falling apples to planetary orbits, suggesting a universe running by rational rules. Benjamin Franklin's lightning rod, 1752, tamed divine wrath into manageable electricity. Antoine Lavoisier founded modern chemistry by identifying oxygen, while Carl Linnaeus classified nature into orderly categories. The message was clear: the world could be understood, mastered, even improved. But this new rationality had dark undercurrents. The scientific racism of thinkers like Johann Blumenbach classified humans into invented subspecies, justifying colonialism's horrors. Enlightenment ideals coexisted uneasily with thriving slave plantations, a hypocrisy abolitionist like Olaudah Equiano, a freed slave turned writer, ruthlessly exposed. Progress, it seemed, came with moral blind spots wider than the Atlantic. Nowhere were Enlightenment contradictions sharper than in the Atlantic revolutions. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, began as a tax dispute but became a laboratory for Enlightenment ideas. Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, 1776, proclaimed all men are created equal while he owned slaves. The U.S. Constitution, 1787, balanced lofty principles with pragmatic compromises, creating a government both revolutionary and deeply conservative. France's Revolution, 1789 to 1799, started similarly. Financial crisis leading to constitutional monarchy, then spiraled into regicide, terror, and Napoleon. The Declaration of the Rights of Man, 1789, promised liberty, equality, fraternity, but excluded women and slaves. Olympe de Gouges' feminist response got her guillotined. Maximilien Robespierre justified the reign of terror with Rousseau's concept of the general will, proving how easily ideals could morph into tyranny. These revolutions rippled globally. Haiti's slave revolt, 1791 to 1804, terrified slaveholders by succeeding. The only successful slave rebellion creating an independent nation. Toussaint Louverture's constitution abolished slavery before any European power. In response, Napoleon sent troops who captured Louverture. He died in a French jail, but yellow fever and Haitian resistance defeated France. The young republic paid crippling reparations for decades, freedom's cruel price. Meanwhile, Britain's Industrial Revolution quietly began transforming humanity's relationship with nature. James Watt's improved steam engine, 1769, harnessed fossil fuels to do work previously requiring muscles or water wheels. Textile mills clustered near northern England's coal fields, their spinning jennies and power looms multiplying productivity. Canals then railroads shrank distances, while factories drew rural poor into crowded, polluted cities. Living standards initially plummeted, the Engels pause, where wages lagged behind productivity. But the long-term effect was an economic explosion unlike anything before. The social costs were staggering. Children as young as 6 worked 14-hour shifts in mills. London's air turned black with coal smoke. Periodic famines struck Ireland and India as colonial economies shifted to cash crops. Yet productivity soared. Britain's cotton industry processed 50 million pounds annually by 1800, fueling global dominance. The world was dividing into industrialized cores and exploited peripheries, a hierarchy persisting today. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769 to 1821, became both Enlightenment's child and executioner. A Corsican artillery officer who rose through revolutionary chaos, he preserved some revolutionary ideals, meritocracy, legal reforms, while crowning himself emperor, 1804. His Napoleonic Code modernized European laws, but his endless wars killed millions. Defeated at Waterloo, 1815, he left Europe reshaped. Feudal remnants swept away, nationalism awakened, and Britain undisputed naval power. The post-Napoleonic Congress of Vienna, 1815, tried restoring the old order but couldn't unring liberty's bell. Metternich's conservative system suppressed revolutions through secret police and censorship, yet liberalism simmered underground. Greece won independence from the Ottomans, 1821 to 1832, with European Romantic support. Lord Byron died fighting there. Latin American revolutions, 1810 to 1825, created fragile republics under Simón Bolívar's leadership, though economic dependence on Europe continued. Industrialization spread unevenly. Belgium followed Britain early, while Germany and America industrialized by mid-century. France focused on luxury goods rather than heavy industry. Russia remained feudal until the 1860s. Japan, forced open by American gunships, 1853, industrialized astonishingly fast after the 1868 Meiji Restoration, the only non-Western power to do so before the 20th century. Technology reshaped life faster than ever. Railways, Liverpool-Manchester line opened 1830, revolutionized transport. Telegraphs, first message 1844, made communication near instantaneous over wires. Medicine advanced, anesthesia, 1846, ended surgery's agony, while germ theory, Louis Pasteur, 1860s, explained disease transmission. Urban reforms introduced sewers and public health measures, though slums remained deadly. Culture reflected these upheavals. Romanticism rebelled against Enlightenment rationality with emotional intensity. Beethoven's symphonies, Caspar David Friedrich's Lonely Landscapes, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, 1818. Realism later reacted against romantic excess. Gustave Courbet painted ordinary laborers. Charles Dickens exposed industrial squalor. Karl Marx analyzed capitalism's contradictions. Marx's Communist Manifesto, 1848, appeared the same year revolutions swept Europe. France's monarchy fell again. Habsburgs faced rebellions. Italian and German unification movements stirred. Most uprisings failed, but their ideals persisted. Slavery's abolition gained momentum. Britain abolished it in 1833. America after its Civil War, 1865. Brazil last in 1888. Women's rights movements emerged, though suffrage remained decades away nearly everywhere. America's Civil War, 1861 to 1865, pitted industrial North against agrarian South over slavery's expansion. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, reframed the war as freedom's crusade, though racial equality remained unfulfilled. The war's scale previewed industrialized warfare. Railroads moved troops, telegraphs coordinated battles, and Gatling guns hinted at future slaughter. Post-war America industrialized rapidly, its vast resources and immigrant labor fueling Gilded Age excess. European imperialism reached its zenith in the late 19th century's scramble for Africa. Improved weapons, Maxim guns, quinine, malaria prevention, and racist ideologies let Europeans carve up Africa at the 1884 Berlin Conference, with ruler-straight borders ignoring ethnic realities. King Leopold II of Belgium turned Congo into a personal rubber plantation where millions died. Only Ethiopia resisted successfully, defeating Italy at Adwa, 1896. Asia fared slightly better. China suffered through the Opium Wars, 1839 to 42, 1856 to 60, forced to accept British opium imports, then the unequal treaties granting foreigners extraterritorial rights. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, became history's bloodiest civil war with 20 to 30 million dead. Japan, by contrast, modernized rapidly after 1868, defeating Russia in 1905, the first Asian victory over a European power in modern times. The fin de siècle, late 1800s, brimmed with contradictions. Scientific progress accelerated. Einstein's relativity, 1905, Marie Curie's radioactivity research, while Freud's psychoanalysis suggested rationality's limits. Art movements like Impressionism captured fleeting moments, while post-impressionists, Van Gogh, Gauguin, expressed inner turmoil. Colonial exhibitions showcased primitive cultures even as anthropologists like Franz Boas argued for cultural relativism. By 1900, Europe dominated the globe politically and economically, but tensions simmered. Germany's rising power threatened Britain's supremacy. Nationalist movements weakened multi-ethnic empires. Arms races, especially between Britain and Germany, consumed resources. The stage was set for 1914's catastrophe, though few anticipated the coming conflagration's scale. When Gavrilo Princip shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, he unwittingly triggered history's first industrialized world war, and the beginning of the end for European dominance. World War I, 1914 to 1918, began with cavalry charges and ended with tanks, poison gas, and industrialized slaughter. The Western Front's trenches became hellish landscapes where millions died for yards of mud. New technologies, machine guns, airplanes, submarines, made killing efficient beyond imagination. The war's scale was unprecedented. 70 million mobilized, 9 million dead. Empires, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, German, destroyed. The 1919 Versailles Treaty blamed Germany harshly, planting seeds for future conflict. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points promoted self-determination but couldn't prevent colonial powers from keeping their empires. The war's psychological impact was profound. Faith in progress shattered, traditional authority questioned, artistic movements like Dada expressing nihilism. The 1918 flu pandemic, worsened by war conditions, killed 50 million more. Nature's reminder of human fragility. Between the wars, experiments in governance flourished. Soviet Russia became the first communist state after the 1917 revolution, though Lenin's egalitarian ideals quickly hardened into Stalin's dictatorship. Fascism rose in Italy. Mussolini took power in 1922. In Germany, Hitler became chancellor in 1933, offering nationalist, authoritarian alternatives to liberal democracy. The Great Depression, 1929, discredited capitalism for many, while Japan's militarists sought empire building as economic salvation. World War II, 1939 to 1945, dwarfed its predecessor in destruction and moral horror. Blitzkrieg tactics, strategic bombing, and ultimately atomic weapons, Hiroshima, Nagasaki 1945, demonstrated total war's logic. The Holocaust industrialized genocide murdered 6 million Jews plus millions of others. Civilian casualties outnumbered military deaths for the first time, a grim milestone. Yet the war also accelerated technologies, radar, penicillin, rockets, and spurred anti-colonial movements across Asia and Africa. The post-war world emerged divided between US-led capitalism and Soviet communism, the Cold War's bipolar order. Decolonization created dozens of new nations, though many remained economically dependent. The UN, founded 1945, attempted global governance, while the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, set new ethical standards, however imperfectly implemented. European empires crumbled. India gained independence 1947, Algeria 1962, though neocolonialism often replaced direct rule. Technology transformed post-war life dramatically. The Green Revolution's high-yield crops averted Malthusian famine predictions. Television and later the internet reshaped culture and politics. Medical advances like vaccines and antibiotics extended lifespans, while nuclear power promised clean energy alongside apocalyptic risks. Space exploration, from Sputnik, 1957, to the moon landing, 1969, demonstrated science's potential in Cold War rivalries' intensity. Social movements challenged traditional hierarchies. The U.S. Civil Rights Movement, 1950s, 60s, global feminism's second wave, LGBTQ+ rights campaigns, all sought to fulfill Enlightenment ideals of equality that had long excluded them. Environmentalism emerged in response to industrialization's ecological costs, epitomized by Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, 1962. Consumer culture spread globally, creating both prosperity and homogenization worries. The late 20th century saw communism's unexpected collapse. The Soviet Union's dissolution, 1991, ended the Cold War but left the U.S. as sole superpower in a unipolar moment. China embraced market reforms while retaining authoritarian control, becoming an economic powerhouse. Globalization accelerated through free trade agreements and the Internet's rise, creating interconnectedness alongside inequality and cultural backlash. Entering the 21st century, humanity faces unprecedented challenges and opportunities. Climate change threatens ecosystems that supported civilization. Artificial intelligence and biotechnology promise to redefine what it means to be human. The internet has democratized information while enabling surveillance and disinformation. Global pandemics like COVID-19, 2019, test international cooperation. Yet scientific advances continue offering solutions, from renewable energy to medical breakthroughs. History's lesson may be this: every solution creates new problems, every progress exacts costs, and human nature remains constant even as our tools grow more powerful. The Enlightenment's faith in reason persists, though tempered by knowledge of our capacity for irrationality and cruelty. What comes next remains unwritten, a story we're all, knowingly or not, helping to shape. The dawn of the 21st century arrived not with a single defining moment, but with a cascade of interconnected revolutions, technological, environmental, and geopolitical, that reshaped the world faster than any previous era. The year 2000 was meant to herald a new millennium of progress, but instead, it became a mirror reflecting humanity's greatest hopes and deepest anxieties. The digital revolution, which had begun with the personal computer in the 1980s and accelerated with the internet in the 1990s, now reached escape velocity. In 2001, Wikipedia launched, democratizing knowledge in a way Diderot's encyclopedia could only dream of. By 2004, Facebook emerged from a Harvard dorm room, redefining human connection and surveillance. Google, founded in 1998, became the world's librarian, gatekeeper, and advertiser all at once. The smartphone, introduced by Apple in 2007, placed the sum of human knowledge and distraction in billions of pockets. But this digital utopia had cracks. The Arab Spring, 2010 to 2012, showed social media's power to topple dictators, and its limits when faced with entrenched power. Twitter could ignite revolutions, but couldn't sustain them. By 2016, the same tools that connected the world became vectors for disinformation, as Russian troll farms and algorithmic echo chambers warped democracies from the US to the Philippines. Privacy, once assumed, became a luxury. Edward Snowden's 2013 leaks revealed the extent of government surveillance, while corporations monetized every click, like, and search. Meanwhile, globalization's promise that free trade and open borders would lift all boats faced a backlash. The 2008 financial crisis, triggered by Wall Street's reckless gambling with mortgage debt, shattered faith in neoliberal economics. Austerity policies gutted public services from Athens to Detroit, while billionaires accumulated wealth at medieval levels. The Occupy Wall Street movement, 2011, coined, "We are the 99%, but real change remained elusive." By 2016, Brexit and the election of Donald Trump signaled a revolt against the globalist elite, one that would soon spread across Europe, Brazil, and beyond. Climate change, long dismissed as a distant threat, became impossible to ignore. The 2000s saw superstorms like Katrina, 2005, and Haiyan, 2013, while wildfires ravaged Australia and California with increasing ferocity. The 2015 Paris Agreement offered hope, but emissions kept rising. Greta Thunberg's 2018 school strike sparked a global youth movement, yet governments still subsidized fossil fuels like it was the Industrial Revolution. The Anthropocene, the geological epoch defined by human impact, was no longer theoretical. Medicine advanced at breakneck speed. The Human Genome Project, completed in 2003, unlocked DNA's secrets, leading to CRISPR gene editing by 2012. Vaccines for HPV and Ebola saved millions, while mRNA technology, developed for cancer research, would later prove crucial against COVID-19. Yet healthcare disparities widened. In the U.S., the Affordable Care Act, 2010, expanded coverage but left millions uninsured. In poorer nations, diseases like malaria and HIV still ravaged communities that lacked basic infrastructure. War evolved in the 21st century, less about tanks and trenches, more about drones and data. The U.S. invasions of Afghanistan, 2001, and Iraq, 2003, began with shock and awe bombings but devolved into forever wars. ISIS emerged from the chaos, using social media to recruit globally before its so-called caliphate collapsed in 2019. Cyber warfare became a new frontier. Russian hackers attacked Ukraine's power grid, 2015, while the Stuxnet virus, discovered in 2010, showed digital weapons could cripple nuclear programs. China's rise reshaped the global order. Once a sleeping giant, it became the world's factory under Deng Xiaoping's reforms, and by the 2010s, a tech superpower. Huawei rivaled Apple, while TikTok eclipsed American social media. The Belt and Road Initiative, 2013, extended China's influence across Africa and Asia, building ports and railways, and debt traps. Yet tensions simmered. Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests, 2019, the Uyghur genocide, and a trade war with the U.S. signaled a new Cold War in the making. Then came COVID-19. The pandemic, emerging in late 2019, exposed the best and worst of humanity. Scientists developed vaccines in record time, yet misinformation turned masks into political symbols. Lockdowns saved lives but deepened inequality. White-collar workers zoomed from home while essential workers risked infection. Governments printed money to prevent economic collapse, but inflation followed. By 2023, the world had largely moved on, though long COVID and supply chain scars lingered. Artificial intelligence, long confined to labs, suddenly went mainstream. ChatGPT 2022 made AI a household tool, while deepfake technology blurred reality. Automation threatened jobs, from truck drivers to journalists. Optimists dreamed of AI curing cancer. Pessimists warned of Skynet. Governments scrambled to regulate what they barely understood. Space, once the domain of superpowers, became privatized. Elon Musk's SpaceX, founded 2002, revolutionized rocketry, while Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin and Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic promised space tourism. NASA's Artemis program aimed to return humans to the moon by 2025, this time to stay. The question was no longer if humans would reach Mars, but when and who would profit. Culture fragmented in the digital age. Streaming killed cable TV, algorithms dictated music tastes, and TikTok dances replaced shared cultural moments. Social justice movements, #MeToo, 2017, Black Lives Matter, 2020, spread globally, challenging centuries of oppression. Yet backlash followed, as reactionaries weaponized cancel culture to resist change. As the 2020s unfolded, the world stood at a crossroads. Democracy was in retreat, with authoritarianism rising from Moscow to Brasilia. The climate crisis demanded action, yet fossil fuels still ruled. Technology promised utopia, but delivered polarization. The lessons of history, that power corrupts, that progress isn't linear, that human nature remains constant, felt more relevant than ever. The 21st century story is still being written. Its defining crisis might be climate collapse, an AI uprising, or a war over Taiwan. Or perhaps, against all odds, humanity will finally learn to cooperate before it's too late. As the 21st century grapples with digital empires and climate crises, it's worth remembering that history's first truly globalized world order emerged not from Silicon Valley, but from the windswept steppes of 13th century Mongolia. The parallels are uncanny. Where today's tech giants build platforms connecting billions, the Mongols created history's most extensive land network, binding continents through trade routes that moved goods, ideas, and even plagues with terrifying efficiency. The Mongol Empire at its zenith, 1227 to 1368, operated with a logistical precision that would make modern supply chain managers weep. Their famed Yam courier system, a network of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart, could move messages from Kharkiv to Beijing in about 2 weeks, a speed unmatched until the telegraph. Each station kept fresh horses, food, and armed guards, operating with the ruthless efficiency of a medieval Amazon Prime. Marco Polo marveled at how these riders could cover 300 miles in a single day, their endurance surpassing even modern marathon cyclists. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just speed, but its democratization of movement. Under the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, a merchant could travel from Venice to Dadu, modern Beijing, with a single safe-conduct pass called a peza. These golden or silver tablets, inscribed with the Great Khan's orders, functioned like 13th century diplomatic passports combined with corporate credit cards, honoring the bearer's expenses at any Yam station. The result? Silk Road trade volumes exploded, with Chinese silk reaching Persian markets and Venetian glass appearing in Yuan dynasty palaces. The Mongols' approach to governance was shockingly modern in its pragmatism. Unlike later European colonizers, they didn't impose their language or religion. Instead, they recruited talent wherever they found it. Persian administrators ran Chinese provinces. Chinese engineers built siege engines for Middle Eastern campaigns. Their capital at Karakoram boasted 12 pagan temples, 2 mosques, and one Christian church, all within shouting distance of the Khan's palace. This wasn't multiculturalism by principle, but by cold calculation. Why waste good talent over theological quibbles? Their military innovations remain studied in war colleges today. The Mongol decimal system organized armies into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, tumans, creating a flexible command structure that could coordinate across continents. Their composite bows, laminated from horn, sinew, and wood, outranged European longbows by 100 yards while being small enough to fire from horseback at full gallop. Psychological warfare was perfected to an art. They deliberately let a few survivors escape besieged cities to spread terror, a tactic later echoed in modern propaganda warfare. Perhaps their most surprising legacy was environmental. Recent ice core studies show that the Mongol conquests may have cooled the planet. The theory goes that their depopulation of vast regions, an estimated 40 million deaths, allowed forests to regrow on abandoned farmland, absorbing enough CO2 to cause a small but measurable dip in global temperatures. It's a grim reminder that human activity has shaped climate long before the Industrial Revolution. Yet for all their achievements, the Mongols struggled with the same problem haunting modern superpowers: overextension. By the late 13th century, their empire had fractured into four rival khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Each adapted to local cultures. The Ilkhans converted to Islam, the Yuan adopted Chinese bureaucracy, but lost the unifying Mongol identity. Like a medieval version of a corporation spinning off subsidiaries, they became victims of their own success. The Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368, under Kublai Khan presents a fascinating case study in cultural assimilation. While maintaining Mongol traditions like hunting festivals and steppe-style governance, they embraced Chinese arts and Confucian rituals. Kublai built his capital at Dadu, modern Beijing, constructing this city of the Khan with Chinese urban planning but Mongolian spaciousness. His summer palace at Xanadu, immortalized by Coleridge's poem, blended Chinese garden aesthetics with Mongolian steppe nostalgia, the original multicultural resort. Their economic policies were remarkably progressive. The Yuan introduced paper money, backed by silver reserves, centuries before Europe abandoned coinage. They standardized weights and measures across China, built granaries to stabilize food prices, and maintained roads with a diligence that would shame many modern nations. Marco Polo's accounts of Chinese cities with public hospitals and fire departments seemed like fantasies to medieval Europeans. But the Yuan also suffered from classic imperial overreach. Their attempted invasions of Japan, 1274 and 1281, were thwarted by typhoons, the original divine wind, kamikaze. Their lavish spending on projects like the Grand Canal extension drained the treasury, while paper money inflation eroded public trust. Like modern governments printing currency, they discovered that economic laws ultimately trump imperial decrees. The Ilkhanate, 1256 to 1335, in Persia tells a different story of adaptation. Initially continuing the Mongols' tradition of slaughtering resistant cities, they gradually Persianized, adopting Islam under Ghazan Khan, r. 1295 to 1304. Their vizier Rashid al-Din compiled the Jami al-Tawarik, Compendium of Chronicles, arguably the first world history text featuring accounts from Europe to China. The Ilkhans became patrons of Persian miniature painting, architecture, and poetry while maintaining the Mongol tradition of religious tolerance. Jewish physicians served at court, Nestorian Christian churches operated freely. Meanwhile, the Golden Horde, 1242 to 1502, ruled Russia not through direct administration, but as shadow overlords. Russian princes had to journey to Sarai, the Horde's capital on the Volga, to receive yarly, charters of rule. This system, while humiliating to Russian chroniclers, inadvertently fostered Moscow's rise. The Mongols consistently backed Moscow's princes as reliable tax collectors, creating the nucleus of future Russian power. The Horde's gradual conversion to Islam under Uzbek Khan, r. 1313 to 1341, created cultural ties with the Islamic world that still influence Russian regions like Tatarstan today. The Chagatai Khanate, 1225 to 1687, in Central Asia became the cultural bridge between East and West. Their territories included the Silk Road's heartland, where Buddhist, Islamic, and steppe traditions blended. Timur, Tamerlane, though not a direct descendant, would later claim legitimacy through imagined Chagatai lineage when building his own empire. The Khanate's gradual Turkification paved the way for modern Central Asian identities in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. What ultimately undid the Mongol world system wasn't military defeat, but the same microscopic threat that's humbled modern superpowers: disease. The Black Death, 1346 to 1353, likely originated in Mongol-controlled territories, spreading westward along their trade routes with devastating efficiency. The plague killed an estimated 60% of the Golden Horde's population, while in China, the Yuan dynasty lost its tax base and collapsed into the Red Turban rebellions. It was history's first lesson in how globalization could backfire catastrophically. Yet the Mongol legacy persists in unexpected ways. Their postal system inspired later models from the Ottoman Empire to the U.S. Pony Express. Their military tactics influenced everyone from Ottoman Sipahi cavalry to Russian Cossacks. Even modern financial instruments like letters of credit trace back to Mongol trade practices. Perhaps most enduringly, they proved that a connected world wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. As we navigate our own era of global interconnection and cultural collision, the Mongols offer both warning and inspiration. They showed that empires built on mobility and merit could achieve astonishing success, but also that no system is immune to overreach, fragmentation, or microbial threats. Their world, where a Nestorian Christian could serve a Muslim Khan administering Buddhist regions under Mongol laws, feels startlingly familiar in our multicultural age. The next time you complain about supply chain delays or marvel at instant global communication, spare a thought for the Mongol riders who first proved that continents could be bound together, not by silicon, but by sinew, hoofbeat, and sheer audacity. Their empire may be dust, but the interconnected world they envision remains our shared reality, for better or worse. The Mongol Empire's collapse left a power vacuum that reshaped Eurasia like a steppe whirlwind reshaping dunes. Yet their true legacy wasn't in the empires that followed, but in the invisible networks they wove between civilizations, connections that outlasted dynasties and redrew humanity's intellectual horizons. When we trace the arteries of global exchange, of goods, germs, and most importantly, ideas, we find Mongol fingerprints everywhere. Consider the paper revolution they inadvertently sparked. Chinese paper-making technology, which had crept westward slowly for centuries, exploded across Mongol territories like a knowledge wildfire. Tabriz became a paper production hub, supplying the Ilkhanate's bureaucracy and Persian scholars. By 1300, paper mills dotted Spain, their techniques carried by traders who traveled Mongol roads. This humble commodity, lightweight, durable, and far cheaper than parchment, became the unsung hero of the Renaissance. Without Mongol-facilitated paper diffusion, Gutenberg's press might have remained a novelty rather than a revolution. Their impact on cartography was equally profound. Persian scholar Rashid al-Din's world maps, compiled under Mongol patronage, incorporated Chinese, Islamic, and European geographical knowledge with startling accuracy for the 14th century. These works later influenced Venetian mapmakers like Framaro, whose 1459 Mappamundi guided European explorers. The Mongols didn't just conquer territories, they stitched together geographical understanding in ways that would later enable Columbus and da Gama. The transfer of technologies flowed both ways. Persian astronomical instruments reached China under the Yuan dynasty, while Chinese gunpowder recipes traveled westward to transform Middle Eastern and European warfare. The first recorded use of cannon in Europe, 1326, occurred just decades after Mongol contacts intensified, hardly coincidental. Even culinary exchanges tell a story. Pasta from China likely entered Italian cuisine during this period, while Central Asian dumplings evolved into Polish pierogi and Russian pelmeni along Mongol trade routes. Medical knowledge also circulated freely under the Pax Mongolica. Persian physicians like Rashid al-Din studied Chinese pulse diagnosis techniques, while Chinese doctors incorporated Islamic ophthalmology methods. The Yuan dynasty established hospitals in Beijing employing Hui, Chinese Muslim, doctors versed in Arabic medicine. This cross-pollination predates modern globalization by 7 centuries, a medieval version of international medical conferences without the name tags and buffet lines. The Mongols' greatest intellectual gift to the world might be their role as accidental librarians. When Hulagu Khan sacked Baghdad in 1258, his destruction of the House of Wisdom is well documented. Less known is how Mongol rulers later became patrons of scholarship, preserving and transmitting knowledge their ancestors had nearly erased. The Rabi Rashidi complex in Tabriz housed a library, hospital, and research center where scholars from China to Byzantium exchanged ideas. In this paradoxical way, the Mongols both nearly destroyed and crucially preserved the intellectual heritage of Eurasia. Their linguistic legacy remains embedded in our words. The Russian yamshik, postal courier, derives from the Mongol yam system. Horde entered European languages through encounters with the Golden Horde, originally from the Mongol Ordu camp. Even serendipity traces back to Serendib, the Persian name for Sri Lanka that spread via Mongol-facilitated trade routes before Horace Walpole coined the term in 1754. Like linguistic archaeologists, we can trace the paths of empire through etymology. Religious exchanges during this period reshaped spiritual landscapes. Nestorian Christianity, nearly extinct in Europe, thrived along Mongol trade routes from Beijing to Baghdad. Tibetan Buddhism spread northward into Mongol territories, laying foundations for the Dalai Lama's later influence. Even Islam's expansion into Southeast Asia owes debts to Mongol-facilitated maritime trade networks that carried Sufi missionaries. This was an age when religious identity became fluid. The Ilkhanate's rulers shifted between Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, like modern CEOs changing business strategies. The artistic crosscurrents are equally fascinating. Persian miniature painting absorbed Chinese landscape techniques during the Ilkhanate period, creating a hybrid style that would later influence Mughal art. Blue and white porcelain, that iconic Chinese export, actually developed through Yuan dynasty experiments combining Chinese ceramic skills with Persian cobalt pigments. The famous David vases from 1351, now in the British Museum, stand as physical testaments to this creative fusion. Their intricate designs a conversation between brushstrokes from different continents. Musical traditions also intermingled. The Central Asian lute, dudur, evolved into the Persian setar, which in turn influenced the Chinese pipa. Mongol court music incorporated elements from conquered territories, creating performances where Persian string instruments accompanied Chinese lyrics praising the Great Khan. If modern world music has ancestors, they performed in 14th century Karakoram. Even games traveled the Mongol web. The Persian game of shatranj, ancestor of modern chess, reached China during this period, while the Chinese tile game that would become mahjong may have drawn inspiration from Middle Eastern dominoes. These weren't just pastimes, but cognitive technologies, systems of strategy and probability that shaped thinking across cultures. The Mongols' role in spreading mathematics might be their most underappreciated contribution. The Chinese counting rod system likely influenced the development of the abacus in the Islamic world, while Persian algebra texts reached China during the Yuan dynasty. Decimal place value notation, though Indian in origin, spread more rapidly across Eurasia thanks to Mongol-facilitated exchanges. When Fibonacci introduced Arabic numerals to Europe in 1202, he was tapping into a knowledge network the Mongols would soon supercharge. Their environmental impact extended beyond the temporary climate cooling from depopulation. The Mongols' movement of plant species transformed agriculture across continents. Persian melons appeared in Chinese gardens, while Chinese peaches reached the Middle East. The Yuan dynasty established experimental farms where agronomists from different regions shared techniques, a medieval version of agricultural exchange programs. This knowledge network had its dark sides too. The same routes that spread papermaking also carried the Black Death. The medical knowledge exchanged included early biological warfare techniques. Mongol besiegers reportedly catapulted plague victims into cities. The environmental transfers included invasive species alongside cultivated crops. Like modern globalization, it was a package deal of benefits and consequences. Yet the net effect was undeniable. The Mongols compressed Eurasia in ways that made the later age of discovery possible. When Columbus sailed west, he carried maps informed by Mongol-era geography. When Vasco da Gama rounded Africa, he sought spices whose trade routes Mongols had secured. Even the printing press owed debts to paper technologies the Mongols helped diffuse. In this light, 1492 appears less like a beginning and more like the maturation of processes set in motion 2 centuries earlier. The true measure of their empire lies not in the cities they razed, but in the connections they forged. They built no colosseums or great walls, but something more enduring, the neural pathways of global exchange. Today, as we debate the merits and perils of interconnectedness, we're revisiting questions the Mongols first posed. How much unity can diversity withstand? What gets lost and gained in translation? And can any empire, no matter how vast, truly control the ideas it unleashes? Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the Mongol world system comes from an unexpected source, the margins of a 14th century Persian manuscript. There, an anonymous scribe doodled a camel and a dragon sharing a meal. No explanation, just 2 creatures from different mythologies breaking bread. In that tiny sketch lies the Mongol legacy, not conquest, but conversation, not domination, but the quiet art of bringing strange things together to see what they might say. The Mongols may have receded from the world stage by the 15th century, but their cultural DNA continued replicating through successor states in ways that still shape modern Eurasia. Like steppe grass whose roots survive winter only to sprout anew, Mongol traditions adapted and persisted long after their empire's political collapse. To understand contemporary Central Asian identity, Russian governance, or even Chinese administrative practices, one must trace these living threads back to their nomadic origins. In the ruins of Karakoram, archaeologists have uncovered something unexpected. Not just weapons and treasure, but multilingual tax records, medical prescriptions in Arabic, and Buddhist prayer scrolls in Tibetan. This was no crude barbarian camp, but the nerve center of a sophisticated administrative machine. The Mongols' bureaucratic innovations outlived their reign. The Russian Yamskaya Pavanost, postal service obligation, directly descended from the Mongol yam system, persisting until the 19th century. Even today, China's autonomous regions echo the Yuan dynasty's system of ethnic classification and indirect rule. The military traditions proved equally enduring. Ottoman Sipahi cavalry adopted Mongol-style composite bows and feigned retreat tactics, which later influenced European light cavalry. The Russian Cossacks, originally Tatar-Mongol-influenced horsemen, became Tsarist Russia's frontier enforcers using Mongol-derived reconnaissance methods. Napoleon's disastrous 1812 invasion foundered partly because Russian generals employed a steppe strategy, trading space for time, scorching earth, and harassing supply lines, just as Jebe and Subutai had done centuries earlier. Mongol strategic thinking even permeates modern warfare. The Soviet deep battle doctrine of World War II, rapid armored thrusts bypassing strongpoints to disrupt rear areas, bore uncanny resemblance to Mongol operational art. American General George Patton reportedly carried a copy of The Secret History of the Mongols during his 1944 dash across France. Contemporary special forces' emphasis on mobility, decentralized command, and psychological operations all have precedence in Mongol campaigns. The culinary legacy is more appetizing. From Moscow to Beijing, the ubiquitous dumpling, pelmeni, mantai, jiaozi, traces its lineage to Mongol campaign food designed for portability and calorie density. The Kazakh beshbarmak, 5 fingers, a dish of boiled meat and noodles eaten without utensils, directly descends from Mongol field rations. Even the Russian samovar's central placement in homes echoes the Mongol preference for always available hot drinks, though they preferred fermented mare's milk to tea. Linguistic remnants persist in unexpected places. The Mongolian word tom, meaning big, appears in Moscow's Kremlin, from Kremlin tom, while Hural, assembly, survives in Mongolia's modern parliament name. Turkic languages absorbed thousands of Mongol military and administrative terms during the Golden Horde period, which later filtered into Russian. Even English words like Khan, Horde, and Tulwar, through Hindi, entered via Mongol-mediated contacts. Artistic influences followed trade routes. The distinctive blue domes of Samarkand's Registan Square blend Persian tile work with Mongol-patronized Chinese ceramic techniques. The lotus throne motif in Tibetan Buddhist art actually originated in Yuan Dynasty China before spreading westward. Persian miniature painting developed new landscape perspectives after exposure to Chinese scroll paintings brought by Mongol administrators. Religious syncretism took root across former Mongol domains. In Siberia, the Buryat people merged Tibetan Buddhism with indigenous shamanism, a spiritual alloy only possible under Mongol religious tolerance. The Russian Orthodox Church adopted Mongol-era administrative divisions for its diocese, while Sufi Islam in Central Asia absorbed elements of Mongol ancestor veneration. Even the Dalai Lama institution owes its political dimension to Yuan dynasty patronage of Tibetan Buddhism. The legal legacy is particularly striking. The Great Yasa legal code's emphasis on swift justice and harsh penalties for theft influenced Russian criminal traditions. More surprisingly, Qing dynasty China, 1644 to 1912, adopted aspects of Mongol military law for its banner system, while Ottoman land tenure systems borrowed from Ilkhanate models. The concept of collective responsibility in Russian peasant communes may have roots in Mongol-era tax collection practices. Modern transportation networks still follow Mongol contours. The Trans-Siberian Railway essentially retraces the northern Silk Road routes secured by Mongol patrols. China's Belt and Road Initiative consciously echoes the Pax Mongolicus trade corridors, though with bullet trains instead of post horses. Even the stands of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan owe their stand suffix, Persian for land of, to Mongol-era administrative divisions. Genetic studies reveal another layer of legacy. Approximately 8% of men across former Mongol territories carry a Y-chromosomal lineage tracing to a single 13th century progenitor, likely a Mongol noble whose descendants spread widely through the empire's elite networks. This doesn't indicate mass rape as once assumed, but rather the social mobility possible under Mongol meritocracy, where capable soldiers and administrators could rise regardless of origin. The psychological impact lingers too. Russian chronicles' obsessive focus on the Mongol yoke shaped national identity for centuries, while in China, the Yuan dynasty's collapse became a cautionary tale about foreign rulers losing the mandate of heaven. Persian literature memorialized Mongol conquests as both catastrophe and divine judgment. These narratives hardened into cultural memories that still influence geopolitics. Russia's complex relationship with Asia, China's ethnic policies, and Central Asia's search for post-Soviet identity all bear Mongol fingerprints. Even environmental management shows Mongol influence. The traditional Mongolian odor system of rotational grazing is now studied by ecologists as sustainable pasture management. The Yuan dynasty's nationwide granary system anticipated modern food security policies. Their prohibition on polluting rivers, punishable by death under Yasa law, would delight contemporary environmental regulators. Perhaps the most surprising survival is in governance philosophy. Modern Singapore's meritocratic bureaucracy, Dubai's tolerance of diverse cultures for economic gain, even Silicon Valley's move fast and break things ethos all have parallels in Mongol practice. The empire thrived by promoting talent regardless of background, encouraging useful technologies regardless of origin, and prioritizing pragmatic results over ideological purity, a management style startlingly relevant to our globalized age. As the sun sets over the Mongolian steppe today, herders still use the same circular girt dwellings their ancestors did, now with solar panels powering flat-screen TVs. The horses remain, though motorcycles share pasture space. The eternal blue sky still arches over a land that once ruled half the world, its people neither romanticizing nor apologizing for that past. In this continuity lies the ultimate Mongol legacy, not frozen tradition, but the art of adapting while retaining core identity, a lesson for all civilizations navigating change. The Mongols didn't just conquer the world, they rewrote its operating system in ways we're still deciphering. Their empire vanished, but its code runs silently beneath the surface of modern Eurasia, waiting for perceptive observers to control plus alt plus delete their assumptions about barbarians at history's gates. The 21st century has witnessed an extraordinary scholarly reckoning with the Mongol Empire as new archaeological discoveries and digital humanities projects dismantle centuries of Eurocentric prejudice. What was once dismissed as a mindless horde is now recognized by historians as the architects of the first truly globalized world system. A revelation forcing us to rewrite economic and cultural histories with Central Asia at their center rather than the periphery. Groundbreaking work by the Mongolian Academy of Sciences has upended traditional narratives. Out of Raga, the recently discovered palace complex of Genghis Khan's son Talyui, archaeologists found not just weapons but multilingual administrative seals and imported Chinese ceramics alongside Persian glassware. The site's layout, with separate quarters for Buddhist, Muslim, and Christian officials, physically embodies the Mongol policy of religious accommodation. Digital reconstructions show a compound designed for both ceremonial grandeur and bureaucratic efficiency, its orientation aligning with both Mongolian sacred geography and Chinese feng shui principles. Climate science has added another dimension to our understanding. Ice core samples from Mongolia's Altai Mountains reveal an unusually warm, wet period during the early 13th century, the very years of Genghis Khan's rise. This Mongol optimum created ideal conditions for the steppe's grass to flourish, enabling the unprecedented mobility and horse-rearing capacity that fueled conquest. Contemporary tree-ring studies show subsequent decades of drought, suggesting environmental stress may have contributed to the empire's fragmentation, a cautionary tale for our age of climate instability. Genetics research has demolished the bloodthirsty invader stereotype. A landmark 2022 study in Scientific Reports analyzed DNA from 6,000-year-old Mongolian burial sites, tracing how steppe populations were always far more genetically diverse than previously assumed. The famous Genghis Khan haplotype present in 8% of Asian males turns out to represent just one of several successful paternal lineages from the period, indicating the empire facilitated widespread social mobility rather than simple patriarchal dominance. Economic historians now credit the Mongols with creating history's first transcontinental free trade zone. By analyzing medieval tariff records along the Silk Road, researchers have documented how Mongol protection reduced trade taxes from 30% to under 5% along secured routes. Their introduction of standardized weights, silver-based currency, and enforceable contracts created conditions resembling modern global commerce. The Yuan dynasty's use of paper money, Chao, anticipated fiat currency by 5 centuries, though inflation from overprinting ultimately undermined the system, another strikingly contemporary lesson. Digital humanities projects are revolutionizing Mongol studies. The Pax Mongolica database at Columbia University has geotagged over 50,000 artifacts from London to Kyoto, revealing patterns of cultural exchange invisible to previous scholars. Their mapping shows how Chinese blue and white porcelain designs reached Persia decades before the pigments needed to replicate them, proving ideas sometimes traveled faster than materials. Another project uses AI to analyze linguistic shifts in medieval Uyghur scripts, demonstrating how Turkic languages absorbed Mongol administrative terminology much like English later incorporated French legal terms after the Norman conquest. Art historians are reappraising Mongol-era creativity. The Metropolitan Museum's 2023 exhibition Before the Great Khan showcased how steppe art traditions influenced Persian miniature painting and Chinese landscape scrolls simultaneously. Recent infrared scans of Ilkhanid manuscripts reveal underdrawings combining Chinese brush techniques with Persian compositional principles, literal layers of cultural fusion. Even the iconic David vases from Yuan, China, long considered purely Chinese, are now understood to incorporate shapes derived from Mongol metalwork traditions. Military historians are extracting timeless lessons from Mongol campaigns. The U.S. Army War College's 2024 analysis of the 1223 Khalkha River battle demonstrates how Subbutai's feigned retreat maneuver has been replicated in modern conflicts from the 1991 Gulf War's left hook to Ukrainian counteroffensives against Russia. Their research confirms the Mongols' unparalleled ability to coordinate separated forces across vast distances, a capability only matched in the 20th century with radio communications. Environmental historians highlight sustainable aspects of Mongol rule. Their prohibition on spring hunting to allow animal reproduction and strictures against water pollution anticipated modern conservation principles. The Mongol exchange, their deliberate transplantation of drought-resistant crops across Eurasia, created agricultural resilience that fed populations for generations. Recent studies suggest their depopulation of certain regions may have allowed forests to regenerate, temporarily offsetting medieval climate change through carbon sequestration. Even culinary history is being rewritten. Molecular analysis of residue on Mongol-era cookware has identified the earliest known examples of East-West fusion cuisine: Persian saffron in Chinese-style bronze pots, Chinese tea leaves in Central Asian ceramic vessels. The famed Mongolian barbecue turns out to have roots in field kitchens designed to feed thousands while maintaining mobility, their cooking methods optimizing both calorie retention and hygiene during campaigns. This scholarly renaissance is dismantling persistent myths. The Destroyer of Cities narrative ignores how Mongol rulers rebuilt Baghdad's irrigation systems and Samarkand's markets. The illiterate barbarian claim collapses before multilingual administrative documents from Karakorum. The cultural wasteland stereotype is refuted by Yuan dynasty poetry blending Chinese and Turkic forms. Contemporary Central Asian nations are reclaiming this heritage. Mongolia's 2022 Nomadic Diplomacy initiative trains diplomats in traditional steppe negotiation techniques. Kazakhstan's Golden Horde Studies program explores how Mongol legal traditions could inform modern Eurasian economic integration. Even in Russia, Tatarstan's universities are re-evaluating the Mongol legacy as part of a distinct Eurasian civilizational path. The ultimate lesson may be one of unexpected connections. As we grapple with our own era of globalization, climate stress, and cultural exchange, the Mongol experience offers both warning and inspiration. They demonstrated how openness to diverse talents could build empires, how environmental factors shape human events, and how interconnected systems create both opportunities and vulnerabilities. Their world, where a Nestorian Christian doctor could prescribe Arabic medicine to a Buddhist monk in a Muslim-designed hospital under Mongol law, suddenly seems less ancient history than parallel universe. Perhaps the most fitting tribute comes from an unexpected quarter: Silicon Valley's tech entrepreneurs. The Mongol CEO management style, decentralized decision-making, meritocratic promotion, and rapid adaptation is now studied at Stanford Business School. When Mark Zuckerberg named Facebook's early AI Genghis, it was only half in jest. The original disruptors, it seems, still have lessons to teach the new ones. As our journey through the Mongol Empire's legacy draws to a close, we find ourselves standing at a peculiar crossroads between past and present. The paradox of the Mongols, simultaneously destroyers and connectors, conquerors and facilitators, mirrors our own complex era of globalization. Their story resists simple moralizing, offering instead something far more valuable: a case study in how civilizations transform through collision and connection. The Mongols achieved what no one expected from steppe nomads. They compressed continents together with such force that the cultural and technological exchanges sparked during their reign continued reacting long after their political demise. Like nuclear fusion creating new elements, their empire forged unexpected combinations: Chinese gunpowder meeting Arab chemistry, Persian poetry inspiring Chinese verse, Venetian merchants learning from Uyghur translators. These syntheses didn't just fade, they became the building blocks of our modern world. Perhaps their most enduring lesson is about the power of openness. At their height, the Mongols practiced a pragmatic pluralism that put many modern societies to shame. Their willingness to adopt whatever worked, Persian administration, Chinese siege engineers, European armorers, created an empire where talent trumped pedigree. In our age of resurgent nationalism and culture wars, this aspect of their legacy feels particularly poignant. Yet we must also remember the costs. The Mongol peace came at the price of millions of lives. Their environmental impact, from the temporary repopulation of forests to the spread of plague-infected fleas, reminds us that human systems are always entangled with ecological ones. Their empire ultimately fragmented because, like all human creations, it couldn't resolve the tension between central control and local autonomy. As the sun sets on our exploration, we're left not with definitive answers but with better questions. How do we balance openness with identity? How do we connect without conquering? How do we harness technology's potential without becoming its prisoners? The Mongols asked these questions in their own way 7 centuries ago. Their answers were imperfect, but the questions endure. In the end, the Mongol Empire endures not in statues or borders, but in the invisible architecture of our interconnected world. The next time you drink tea, a Mongol-favored beverage that became a global commodity, or use a paper receipt their administration ran on paperwork, or marvel at some cultural fusion, remember, you're experiencing echoes of history's most unexpected unifiers. Their empire may be gone, but the world they made remains ours to navigate. The steppe winds still blow, carrying whispers of hoofbeats that once changed the world. What they'll say next depends on how well we've listened.